revenue mobilization as a foundation for sustainable development. We recognize that expanding the tax base and improving compliance are critical to creating the fiscal space needed to invest in priority sectors such as health, education, and social protection. By working together, we can ensure that reforms in revenue mobilization and expenditure efficiency translate into tangible improvements in service delivery. Today's discussion is an opportunity to reflect together on how to best achieve these policy reforms. I hope you will enjoy the session today, but more importantly, that you would take the time to review the report and use it as a guide as we continue with these policy reform. Thank you again very much and welcome. And I would now like to invite our Division Director for his own remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayo. Good morning to you all and warm welcome to the launch of the World Bank's latest economic update for Uganda, ladies and gentlemen. Our update shows that Uganda's economy continues to grow steadily, but the sustainability of that growth is increasingly threatened by rising fiscal risks, climate change, structural challenges, and global policy uncertainties. While recent growth and low inflation are very encouraging, fiscal risks are rising as spending outpaces revenues and debt service absorbs a larger share of the budget. In fact, Uganda spends about 28% of its tax revenue for interest payments alone. Looking ahead, slow reforms, limited job creation, climate vulnerabilities, and external shocks could undermine further progress if decisive actions are not taken to strengthen revenue, improve spending efficiency, and build resilience for the longer and medium term. We argue in this update that domestic revenue mobilization and spending efficiency are really at the core of Uganda's development challenges. Uganda's ambition to achieve the tenfold growth strategy, I think it's only possible if the country decisively addresses the twin challenges of raising more domestic revenue and spending it more efficiently. Indeed, domestic revenue mobilization, in my view, must be prioritized above all else. With overseas development assistance declining and fiscal pressures rising, Uganda's ability to finance its development priorities increasingly depends on its own resources. As we highlight in this update, Uganda's current tax to GDP ratio remains stubbornly low at about 13%, and that's below the regional average of about 16% and the government's own target of 18%. Obviously, this gap limits the government's capacity to invest in health, education, agriculture, infrastructure, and social protection, and undermines the country's resilience to shocks. Ladies and gentlemen, this update makes it clear if Uganda's budget were to meet the needs of a rapidly growing population, and you have one of the youngest populations, I think with about 600,000 new labor market entrants every year before 2030, and that number will rise to about 1 million a year by 2040. The country will need to do much, much more to mobilize domestic revenue. And that means broadening the tax base, closing loopholes, and ensuring that high net worth individuals and large firms contribute their fair share. This update provides some concrete policy options, including reforming the personal income tax system, strengthening compliance, strengthening compliance among the high net worth individuals, and reconsidering tax exemptions that erodes the tax base and shifts the burden to a shrinking pool of compliant taxpayers. Thank you. The update emphasizes that making every shilling count is just as important as raising more revenue. It highlights that too much of Uganda's budget is consumed by recurrent expenditures, while vital development spending on infrastructure and human capital remains insufficient. Inefficiencies in public investment management, procurement, and maintenance reduce the value Uganda receives from its spending, with only about 2/3 of the capital budget executed each year, and poor project design quite often leading to costly delays and asset depletion. To address these challenges, the update recommends strengthening public investment management, standardizing unit costs, enhancing monitoring and evaluation, and boosting investment in education and health to foster a more productive workforce and better social outcomes. In fact, these are the kind of policies that the government has decided that it wants to pursue. I think it would be important at this time to implement some of these reforms. By prioritizing spending efficiency, for example, by rolling out a public electronic public procurement system to all government agencies, Uganda can create additional fiscal space. This report estimates that at least 0.5% of GDP, while at the same time can help to accelerate growth and support the tenfold growth strategy. In fact, some studies have shown that in most low middle income countries, that countries can save on average at least 1% of GDP by implementing a functioning electronic public procurement system alone. Going beyond simply outlining challenges, this report lays out a clear set of reform options aimed at enhancing domestic revenue mobilization and spending efficiency, which I think are vital for the country's sustainable, inclusive growth and amid a declining aid environment and rapid demographic change. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, decisive actions on domestic revenue mobilization and spending efficiency are essential for achieving inclusive, sustainable growth. As outlined in this update, the country will need to urgently expand its tax base, improve compliance, and ensure that revenue is invested strategically in development and social sectors to meet the needs of a rapidly growing population. And we at the World Bank are fully committed to support these efforts so that Uganda can generate higher, sustainable, and inclusive growth that can create more, better, and more inclusive jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Chimiao, that was Mr. Chimiao Fan, Division Director for the World Bank, responsible for, normally they start with Kenya, but since we're in Kampala, I'll say responsible for Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and Somalia. So thank you very much. So it's my pleasure to invite the guest of honor to give his remarks, Mr. Patrick Ochailap, Deputy Secretary to the Treasury. I think a man who knows everything Uganda regarding this subject. Welcome, sir. Thank you.
My pleasure, Master of Ceremony. The World Bank Country Director for Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and Somalia, Mr. Chimiao Fan. The World Bank Country Manager for Uganda, Madam Francisca Ayodeji Okalo. Heads of diplomatic missions here present, honorable members of parliament here present. It's written here, so I'm not very sure whether the members of parliament here present. I'm very sure for a fact they're on a busy agenda right now. Senior government officials here present, the representatives of the private sector, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm certainly excited to be here to preside over the launch of the 25th edition of the World Bank's Uganda Economic Update, mainly focusing on increasing Uganda's fiscal space through improved revenue mobilization and enhancing efficiency in spending and service delivery. This is a very timely assessment, especially given the task that we have ahead to mobilize resources for financing government's tenfold growth strategy. Government appreciates this kind of research because it helps us to identify gaps in our economic policy agenda, but also helps us reorient the policies that we have towards what we say we are going to achieve before 2040. But before I turn to the main topic of discussion today, I wish to highlight a few things which are factual in nature on the performance of the economy and the outlook as we see it. Recent economic developments. During the financial year 2024-25, Uganda's economy registered strong growth. GDP grew by 6.3% compared to 6.1% in the financial year 2023-24. In nominal terms, the size of the economy expanded to Uganda shillings 226.3 trillion last financial year, equivalent to about 61.3 billion US dollars. Certainly a paltry figure, but shows a growth path. Rising from 203.7 trillion, equivalent to 53.9 billion the previous year, 2023-2024. Inflation certainly has remained low, making it easy and better for government and the private sector to plan better and implement their plans consistent with the aspirations that they want to achieve, and recorded only 3.8% in both July and August this year. This has largely been due to a well-coordinated fiscal and monetary policy between the central bank and the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, resulting in overall macroeconomic stability and economic resilience. The shilling has equally strengthened against the US dollar, supported by the following: increased inflows from offshore investors and diaspora remittances, given the confidence they have in our instruments. Foreign exchange earnings from exports, which have both expanded and become diversified, and robust monetary policy implemented by Bank of Uganda to keep in check the rapid fluctuation of the shilling. In addition, government decision to import petroleum products directly from refineries through Uganda National Oil Company has also helped to stabilize oil prices and the demand for foreign exchange in this country. In fact, preliminary calculations show that we're making a saving of up to about $81 million annually on imports of oil, which were going to the middlemen in the transactions. Exports of goods and services grew by 32% in financial year 2024-25 to Uganda shillings 13.3 billion, driven by higher coffee and cocoa volumes and prices, and prices of gold and prices of re-export of gold from this country. Merchandise goods exports increased to about 10.6 billion last financial year, up from 7.8 billion a year before, registering an annual growth of 36%. I also mentioned that quite a number of our exports are getting diversified and also a little more complex in terms of value addition, and they are earning quite substantial resources and therefore going in the trajectory of our export receipt expansion. Services exports increased by over $400 million to 2.6 billion in last financial year, up from 2.2 billion a year before. The strong export performance has resulted in a reduction in the trade deficit by about 379 million last financial year compared to the previous year. It's still paltry. The trade deficit is still big, but I think the trajectory that we're taking in terms of narrowing the gap between exports and our imports is improving tremendously. Moreover, the larger part of our imports certainly are linked to the investments in the oil and gas industry, which are quite heavy in terms of outlays. The FDI, foreign direct investments, increased to US $3.7 billion in financial year 2024-25 from 3 billion in the previous year, registering an annual growth of 22.3%, while remittances increased to US $1.569 billion last financial year compared to 1.403 billion the previous year. Tourism receipts, on the other hand, equally increased to 1.6 billion in last financial year compared to 1.4 billion the previous year, registering an annual growth of about 13.4%. Let's look at the fiscal performance so that we anchor this discussion in the proper context. Tax and non-tax revenue for last financial year was 32.3 trillion compared to 27.8 trillion the previous year. Total revenue collections were equivalent to 14.3% of GDP. On the other hand, total expenditure was 72.8 trillion in financial year 2024-25. Excluding the Bank of Uganda Securities and Domestic Free Financing, the debt rollover, total expenditure amounted to 42.2 trillion, equivalent to 20.8% of GDP. The budget deficit was therefore estimated at 6.1% of GDP. I think we shall need to compare that with the figure in the report, slightly different. But that's a fact. What's therefore the outlook for next financial year? I mean for the financial year 26-27 and the medium term. The economy, we project, will grow to about 7% this financial year, and at least 8% per year on average in the next 5 years, excluding oil. At the onset of a commercial production of oil and gas in 2026, that's a new projection we have now, the economy therefore is projected to register almost double-digit growth rates. In nominal terms, therefore, GDP is projected at 251.4 trillion, equivalent to about 69.6 billion this financial year. Income per capita is projected to increase to US $1,393 this financial year, up from 1,263 last financial year. In financial year 2026-27, GDP is projected to grow by 10.4%, which translates to shillings 291.4 trillion, and equivalent to about 80.8 billion, mainly driven by commercial production of oil and gas, which steps in next year. This outlook is on account of the following. 1, a projected increase in production and productivity in key sectors of the economy. 2, effective implementation of wealth creation programs. 3, continued investment in infrastructure. 4, increased exports supported by higher manufactured products, diversified exports, and expanding regional trade, including expanding tariff and non-tariff barriers first within the region. 5, increased foreign direct investments linked to oil and gas, as well as mineral extraction in terms of value addition to minerals, in line with the government policy of not exporting raw materials in form of minerals. 6, rising household aggregate demand and consumption due to implementation of the PDM and other wealth creation programs that boost directly household incomes. 7, addressing institutional and micro-level constraints and maintaining macroeconomic stability, peace, security as prerequisites for sustained high economic growth as factor number 8. Now, back to the 25th edition of World Bank Economic Update. The update certainly highlights issues of fiscal consolidation, suggesting a lack of progress in that area. First, as stated above, the fiscal deficit for last financial year was 6.1%, derived from the computation that I put forward, and not 7.6%. Fiscal consolidation entails a number of elements. These include repurposing the budget, picking those items of the budget that we see as conservative and inefficient way of allocating money and putting them to where there is a high return in public sector investments, as well as those which promote efficiency in the operations of government. These include also improving the efficiency of spending. That is, the rate at which resources are deployed, even when they are budgeted for in those correct areas that have high return to investment. We need to accelerate the rate at which those resources are absorbed and used for the purpose for which the allocations have been made. It also, first and foremost, I agree with you entirely, involves also the improvement in domestic revenue collection. There is no two-way about that. There, the two of us are in sync with the report. But a lot of work needs to be done on what is it that is occurring the revenue side that is making the revenue GDP rate grow slower than the rate at which GDP is growing. We think that our revenue is, tax system is very robust in terms of the buoyancy of the tax system, but there is certainly something that we need to do with respect to correlation between the rate of growth of the economy and the rate of growth of revenue. That is something that we need to certainly nail down, and most analysts point to the fact that the larger part of the growth is not taxed, or maybe there's a very large informal sector where we're not taxing. What are the incentives that we must put in place for us to incentivize the informal sector to formalize and therefore pave way at a later stage to be able to contribute to this exponential growth in the economy? Cutting expenditure per se may not be a useful tool for us to deal with fiscal consolidation, but rather looking at those areas that are mentioned as mechanisms to realize more efficiency gains in resource allocation. Whereas it's true that we still have supplementary budgets, efforts are being made to significantly reduce their impact on the fiscal space by focusing them on top priorities of the economy. We have also observed over the period that government is taking steps to stamp out what we have variously called budget games, or those innovative approaches that accounting officers use, where they leave out priorities, well knowing that in the course of the financial year, whether you want it or not, you'll be boxed into a corner to finance the priorities because you cannot postpone them any longer beyond that point in time. And instead, they put the money on lower priority areas. Addressing this issue will be a key focus in the budget for next financial year. You must have already seen from the budget called circular that's sent out by PSST the steps we are going to take in order to stamp out budget games. And our budget analysts have been taught and specifically coached into identifying these and eliminating them a priori before the appropriations go for consideration by Parliament. It's also important at this point in time to state that some recurrent expenditures have a development impact and not just consumption. I saw that highlighted in the report, and indeed, you can see quite a number of these non-recurring expenditures, such as expenditures linked to payment of interest for development, for borrowed money for development. We're now paying quite substantial amounts of money with respect to interest on the loans that we borrowed. A lot of money being paid for the powering the current part of the development budget, the fuel, the oil, and all those things that come with development expenditure. I think I want to suggest at this point that perhaps we need to look at these non-wage recurrent expenditures in more detail and see those which are linked to development expenditure to drive that and successfully implement that project, and those certainly which are linked to consumption, buying food like coffee outside here for workshops, and that's really consumptive. But I want us to look, have a deep dive on this non-wage recurrent expenditure. We can set up teams and look at this in detail so that we have a common understanding of what is this animal called non-wage recurrent. Is really a devil that we think about, that it's also the whole of it consumptive? Perhaps, perhaps not. Government recognizes also the significant decline in overseas development assistance. Could be a blessing in disguise so that you can wake up. This presents the government the opportunity to intensify diversification of alternative and innovative financing options, as well as improving those that are already in place. Not the least, our capacity to raise revenue. You know, when somebody pulls a rug under your foot, you don't continue crying for the rug. The guy has taken his rug. You can't continue crying about that. It should be a blessing for you to use that as an opportunity to think harder about how best you must sustain yourself and gain the pride that you want to be independent with respect to how to finance your own domestic issues. In order to mobilize the required resources for the 10-fold strategy, government is putting in place emphasis on boosting domestic revenue mobilization, among others certainly including the integration of systems and the use of IT systems to do the better tracking, better assessment, and conflict-free enforcement mechanisms, which just use a system for you to do this. We put in place a number of systems beginning the last 2 financial years, and the results are very good. Look at the IFRIS. Look at the tax receipt system of the various institutions. You now go to a supermarket when those items make noise. At the end of it all, pay attention to the receipt down there. You see what amount of money has gone to URA real time, which 2 years ago was impossible, which at the point of introduction was seen to be a sinful action because people are used to a cash economy where transactions are going through. So a rollout of such IT systems, including rental, including ground rent, and all those, including even the use of digital stamps for quite a number of the commodities that are in the supermarkets that we buy, is a fantastic idea. Such systems are very, very important, and the more integrate them with the personal income taxes and TIN numbers and so on and so forth, it becomes quite exponential for us to collect the revenue. We're also looking at areas that are already in place for improving the revenue collection and diversifying the alternatives for us to attract large volumes of FDI into the economy for the investment in those areas: mining, industry, manufacturing, and agro-processing. And those areas provide very large expansion potential for the revenue collection. We're also looking at reforms to unlock institutional finance, such as the pension schemes. That was not unfinished business. That was not finished business when we were trying to do the pension reform. We hit a deadlock, but I think this is the right time for us to now opening up and ensure that things like also insurance, expansion of the operations of the capital market, in addition to other innovation financing solutions such as climate finance, Islamic finance. We have just adopted the Islamic banking in this country and also finished the regulations with respect to Islamic banking to provide other alternative sources of revenue, financing for the private sector. As well as sukuk bonds, I think there is a number of innovative approaches there. Infrastructure bonds are also there. Diaspora bonds, improving efficiency of the PPPs. We have taken long on one of them, but I think after that one, I think we shall move faster. The Kampala-Jinja Expressway. I know Bob Kapshenga uses it occasionally to go and check on his enterprises in Jinja. But it can take about 5 hours on that road. So we should move very fast there. On the other hand, also, government has already put in place a credible framework for management and utilization of oil and gas revenues. I think the report talks about it, but I want to allay the fears that it could be difficult or could give us problems ahead of the commencement of commercial production in 2026. It was a settled matter in the Public Finance Management Act, and all pieces of legislation that are necessary for management of all oil revenues are in the legal framework, where all receipts of revenue from oil and gas go to the revenue fund, which is under Bank of Uganda. It only comes to the fiscal side through the budget, and it's linked largely to the fiscal deficit. Revenue, expenditure, the gap between the two, how big is it? And how much can we draw from that? The rest of the money will be invested in the investment funds for current and future generations. That's already a settled matter in the law. So I'm not worried about that. In fact, what we want to do now, also where studies should focus, is to look at the fiscal regime for minerals, mining. It may not be one size fits all. Maybe the fiscal regime for gold may be different from lithium or iron ore. But we need a fiscal regime with certainty that will help attract the foreign investments into the sector for the mining sector, because that's one other big sector which remains underutilized, and the productivity of that area needs to be upped in terms of the kind of studies that need to be done. And I think Director Kagwa will speak to this, because IMF did some work on the kind of fiscal regime that we could be able to put in mining to give certainty to investors in that sector, so that when market studies are done with respect to the potential of those minerals in terms of the international markets, then the certainty with which they should come is very reassuring, because they can see the kind of fiscal regime that comes into play when the FDI comes to that sector. And they make their money, we make our money, and all of us become quite okay. The fiscal regime has been finalized for oil revenues, and will be incorporated in the fiscal strategy of government starting financial year 2026-27. And these resources will be allocated through a unified national budgetary system. Uganda has established the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative Office to ensure good governance of the oil revenues as well. As rightly pointed out in the economic update, the oil and gas resources will be additional revenue to finance productivity improvements and competitiveness enhancement in the non-oil sectors of the economy, especially those that are export-oriented and income-enhancing. The economic update highlights risks related to public debt, especially the debt service costs. Government takes this issue seriously. The financial year 2026-27 budget strategy outlines measures for mobilizing financing while maintaining debt sustainability. We're not going to borrow at any cost. We're going to borrow at a good cost and invest in highly productive areas. And this includes, number one, enhancing reliance on innovative low-cost financing, climate grants to buy out some of the financing requirements in that area, concessional windows, Islamic finance, diaspora instruments. Two, reducing refinancing and foreign exchange risks by deepening domestic markets and lengthening maturities. We're already thinking in the domestic market of 25 years and so on and so forth. Three, aligning project financing with fiscal space and absorptive capacity to avoid cost overruns. And this is also linked with tightening of operations of the PIMS process so that they become the gatekeepers for anything that enters into the public sector investment, which is ready and only waiting for money. And when money comes, we move. Positioning Uganda strategically in global climate and capital markets to unlock new financing opportunities in that area, inshallah. Adopting a balanced financing strategy, number 5, that draws on concessional, semi-concessional, commercial, blended, and non-traditional sources, such as infrastructure and Islamic bond, as well as domestic financial markets. The economic update recommends areas of reforms to improve revenue mobilization. Thank you. In addition, government has introduced changes to tax expenditures to eliminate wastage while supporting industrial policy. The World Bank proposes reforms in the personal income tax. Proposed reforms in the personal income tax will require further study. At the outset, the current proposal will increase the tax burden for individuals instead of reducing it. That's the preliminary assessment that I looked at when I looked at the report. The taxation system must support and promote national savings and encourage establishment of enterprises, some of which will be financed through household savings. Hence, taxing them more heavily than now will be counterproductive and will exacerbate household poverty. The priority should therefore be to improve the tax administration, including through digitization, as I told you, formalization of businesses which are not formally currently done, and there we need to look at the incentive regime to make people come before trying to register them for purpose of taxation. Put something out there that makes every informal sector rush to formalize. Once they are formalized, after 3 or 4 years when they have made their bounty, it becomes easier for you to introduce a low-level tax regime to keep them there, grow businesses, and make money as we all grow. Regulatory reforms are equally necessary to be linked together with all these reforms and measures to expand the economy, certainly along the lines of the work plan that is already concluded with respect to our investments in the economy to expand its size. The 40% personal income tax for those earning 10 million shillings and above per month is among the highest in the world. Moreover, in countries where access to high-quality social services, such as education, health, water, etc., are free. Rather than increasing the tax burden on those who are tax compliant, as suggested in the economic update, the emphasis should be on broadening the tax base, including taxation of the new online economy. These measures to expand the tax base were outlined in the budget speech, and work is already concluded or about to be concluded in ensuring that these many online businesses, because now people don't fly to wherever they used to fly to buy tiles, no. They now order online and items come. And of course, you get them this way, but also that service is not yet in the radar, but we need to do that in terms of integration of systems, as I mentioned earlier. The institutional reforms include integration of databases, I've already mentioned that, on individuals and businesses, digitization, strengthening audits, addressing corruption, simplification of laws and procedures, and equitable or fair taxation system in order to broaden a tax base instead of increasing taxes on certain tax heads. Also, strengthening local government's revenue collection capacity and infrastructure, as well as accountability of revenues, will be critical for revenue mobilization and fiscal sustainability for both at the center and local governments. We have already rolled out the local government tax system and e-logrev, and that one is working out extremely well. Of course, the World Bank worked with us, as well as a number of other development partners, and I think that's one item that we have also delivered under our resource enhancement and improvement project. It's also important to assess the cost-benefit of proposed tax changes to avoid unnecessary disruptions without significant benefits. For example, the proposal for blanket elimination of 10% 10-year tax holidays by government, the government reforms in this area notwithstanding. This will cause perhaps a distortion in the government policy for industrialization, which requires that however weak you are participating in this local economy, those 10-year arrangements should be in place to help you, to grandfather you, grow you. But you must do your part of the bargain. I think that's where the emphasis should be. Rather than eliminate the tax, the 10-year tax holiday, the emphasis should be the capacity of government to monitor what the investors say they are coming to do in this economy and what we are going to do in this economy when you give them the tax base, and what are they doing in reality over the 10-year period. And when it comes to an end, there should be sunset clauses to bring it to an end. That way, we have a seamless benefit of bringing in these investments, monitoring that they are actually doing what they are saying. They say they are going to employ 1,000 high-quality people, not people carrying sacks, no. High-quality people with decent income, decent savings, and decent operational levels, then environmental operational levels, then those are the things that we need to monitor over the 10-year period. And when it comes to an end, sunset clauses set in, and it comes to an end. Where there is abuse in between, for sure, why not stop it? And then we have a good operational level. Measures to improve spending efficiency, to increase fiscal space, include that are now there, improving readiness through which the PIMS process must vet the projects that enter the public sector arena. We thank the bank for supporting these reforms, and I think the bank was very strong in the PIMS process, and I think we now have PIMS Plus on helping us how to implement the programs. And these programs are now in cabinet, and up to yesterday, to remind the authorities that we need these credits approved, they are concessional, they are grants, and we have it out of the way, and that will help greatly improve the vetting process of projects that come into the arena of the public sector investments, and also give us the high value that we expect out of those projects. We shall also be able to repurpose the budget to focus high growth enhancing area, to focus on those high growth areas, improving budgeting and planning, including a local governments level, and also improve absorption capacity of external loans. You may ask, do you need a project to do that? No. We had already done that, but we need to fasten the process of doing it to a level that is acceptable. As a percentage of GDP of around 19 to 20%, aggregate expenditure actually is not very high. Aggregate expenditure is not high. We need to look at the composition of those expenditures to ensure efficiency in allocation and also improve the productivity. In fact, in the Economic Growth Forum, you saw that total factor productivity in this economy is still at a lower level. So we need to deal with those issues that improve total factor productivity on a number of those factors of production, land, labor, capital, IT, in order to make our investments, both in the public and private sector, highly productive, expand the economy in a rational way, and also be able to deepen our ability to collect the revenue out of the profits made by that expanded economy. The issue is how to improve allocative efficiency and to improve the productivity of the current spending. That's where the issue is. To improve our labor productivity, that's my final point, government will gradually rebalance infrastructure development and spending on human capital development. This shift in resources, however, must be taken in tandem with the necessary institutional reforms in education and health sectors to be able to achieve the desired objectives. Consultations on these issues is currently ongoing, including but not limited to linking school feeding program to the output of PDM, for example, so that a particular parish can produce output which the schools buy using what we are using now under PDM, pay the farmers, the households, the money, real time, they supply food to the school. Those kind of things are now, the studies are going on, and I think we shall be able to come at an appropriate time when we are ready with specific policy actions. Lastly, I note the small language there. For example, Uganda near-term consolidation agenda, I'm quoting, must be converted into genuine fiscal adjustment. I think that's Mr. Kagwa. Director of Economic Affairs will discuss this further so that we get a better phraseology for this area, because Uganda near-term, first of all, it's not near-term, we're consolidating. That agenda must be converted into genuine fiscal adjustment. So let's find a language for that so that we are at par in this. I thank you, and God bless you in the discussions. I will seek your permission to go for the next meeting, but let me sit for a few minutes so that I earn the time that I got here. Thank you. God bless you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chilap. That's what you get when you don't get a minister to come and give these sorts of remarks. You get some very detailed responses, almost point for point rebuttal to the recommendations. My three colleagues over there, the ones responsible for the report, and that's him. So I think that makes for a very good basis for a rich discussion. And so we'll get into the weeds, and to get us going, I'll now hand the mic over to somebody I've known for a long, long time, and he's a commercial coffee farmer and a taxpayer, hopefully. Hope he's incentivized enough to pay tax, and he's also a former top media leader in this country and the region, Mr. Robert Kaushenga, please.
Thank you very much. So, Chimel and Ayo, your team has figured out a way of managing me. So they give me this role so that I am inside the tent, directing all my stuff outside, then being outside the tent, doing it inside. So otherwise, but still, I won't let Patrick get away with some of these things. For a moment there, I was wondering, who is launching the report? Is it Patrick? or is it supposed to be Cyril and Silva? But Patrick, I'll just quickly say my things to you because you're running away. You mentioned somewhere something called agro-processing, and it tickled my ears. We, the producers of coffee in this country, employ 12 million people. No factory will ever employ 12 million people. So it doesn't matter how many factories you build, they'll never employ 12 million people and they'll never pass on their profits to us. My suggestion to you is invest in us. Leave the factories to those with the money. Let them bring their own money. We have the coffee. So I wanted to say that to you. So please rethink where you are investing. Don't give money to people putting up factories. Give it to us. We will incentivize the factory owners. Don't worry about that. But Bernard, I pay tax. And when you invited me and Chimia was talking about high net worth individuals, last year I got a call. At this time last year, I got a call. And they said, I am a high net worth individual. So I should go for an audit. By the time we were done, the auditor was bored because when he looked at the amounts, he wondered why he was wasting his time with me. But they still kept me in that category. So I have an idea for Moses. The way we publish the top 10 institutional taxpayers in the country, can we publish the list of high net worth individuals and how much tax they've paid? Why are you scared? It'll be very, anyway. No, it's not my day, and so finally, let's rebalance the economy. So we'll invite the people who are supposed to be presenting the report so that we see whether Patrick, in forestalling what was going to be said, will have succeeded. So first, I'll invite Cyril Depon, who is the senior economist at the World Bank in Uganda, and then after him, so we don't waste time, Silva will also come. And then after that, we will have a panel that will take us through the debate on these matters. I'm actually quite, Bernard, I'm quite impressed. It's a full house. So I guess that I'll cut back on my panel a few minutes to be able to allow the engagement from the rest of the audience, so that because you will be standing between yourselves and lunch. So the more interventions we have in a short time. Just one rule, Patrick has helped us. He's done all the protocol. So when you stand up to speak, don't worry about the protocol and don't thank anybody. We know you're grateful, so just get straight to the point. Okay, Cyril.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear esteemed guests, so my name is Cyril Depon, and I'm the new senior country economist for Uganda, based in Kampala as of last month. Perhaps I'll start with three disclaimers. The first one is that I won't have much value added, of course, and that I thank the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury for helping with my timekeeping. We will be able to skip over some things very, very briefly. The second thing is that this is a report that's been prepared by a broad team, a broad World Bank team, of which I did not have the honor to participate, but which was led by a colleague, Sadia, and Silver here, but also involved a lot of our colleagues at the country office, including in the economic policy and governance team. So it's a much larger team that worked on this report. And perhaps the last, and that also addresses something that was mentioned by the DST, is that because this report is as of June 2025, some of the data that's presented in the report is now slightly dated, and I'll try my best to update a little bit as we go through the slides. Do we have the slides? Please. I mean, we can also go straight to the panel because most of it has been discussed already. Are we good? Okay. Okay. So those of you who are familiar with this report know that we start by section 1 on recent economic developments and the outlook and risks that are presented in the report. And so the report starts by a brief assessment of the global conditions in which the Ugandan economy operates. And so what this shows on the left is that we are operating in a global environment that's been more and more constrained. And what has evolved since the report was published is that there has been a boost, if you will, in global economic activity from from demand, export demand that it was anticipating on the tariffs. So there has been since then a temporary boost, but analysis that our colleagues from the World Bank Global Prospects published this morning show that this is actually easing up, and that the global economic activity might be slowing down moving forward. The second key point that you see on the right side, no. Yes. I am not. This is only moving forward. Yeah. So much for the timekeeping.
This is forward, backward. So it's pressing in the middle? Yes. This is forward, back.
So this is back?
Yes. You need to point to the audience. So point is behind. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Apologies for this. I use the arrows, but yeah. And so there's the other key global development that is presented is the fact that now policy interest rates with easing inflation, policymakers' emphasis is pivoting from worries about inflation towards worried about supporting economic activity. So we see policy interest rates going down in much of the world. Now, as for Uganda, so the DST presented some of the data. So there has been an acceleration of growth. It has been supported by household spending, by public spending, and by export dynamism. And what this has resulted in is a broad-based, so cross-sectoral growth in the Ugandan economy. Now, if we looked at higher frequency indicators, they are still very encouraging for Uganda. So we see that the business confidence indicators are still edging up. We also see that in regional comparison, Uganda is faring pretty well, which remains encouraging for the near-term forecast, which we'll present a bit later. Inflation developments. So we've witnessed, as much of the world, a very large peak in inflation in 2022, 2023, which has eased down, and now it seems like inflation, both core inflation and headline inflation, are below the central bank target. And how that compares, so how that compares to countries in the region is that Uganda has been very cautious, say, with monetary policy, with steady monetary policy, with interest rates remaining high despite low inflation, where you can see that some of the other countries in the region, well, you can't really see, but the blue bars are the inflation rate, and the blue dots are the policy rates, which shows that Uganda, despite having lower inflation, is still keeping rates up, which is anchoring inflation expectations. On the external sector, the DRC also spoke to these developments. So there has been a rise in export by 36%, and they are driven by gains in key exporting commodities, most notably coffee. I mean, you will see gold in there, but gold exports are compensated by gold imports at the same time, so they're not a net contributor, and also cocoa. When we look slightly deeper into the trade trends, what we see is that on the export side, the good performance has been driven mainly by development in commodity prices, whereas export volumes have been quite steady. So what you see on the left-hand panel is that prices. So these are for imports. The prices for imports have been quite stable, but the volumes have gone up. But what you were seeing, but what we see for the export is the opposite trend, is that the prices are going up, but the volumes are actually not as dynamic. The result of those trends is that foreign exchange reserves have been increasing, and that at the same time we have seen an appreciation in the Ugandan shilling exchange rate. Now, this data has been updated since the report. But key developments in public finance point to an increase in the deficit. It's been driven by a very large increase in spending, even though there are increasing tax revenues. And so we have seen the fiscal deficit go from 4.7% of GDP last year to 6.1% this year. And what you see on the left-hand side is that the Charter for Fiscal Responsibility targets were about 4% of GDP, and now we have seen stalled fiscal consolidation. The way this has been, the financing gap has been bridged is by resorting very much to domestic financing, which you see. So again, you can't see all the legend, but FY25 is the last bar in the second graph, and you can see that the domestic financing increased markedly, whereas external financing has remained relatively stable. And then when we look at the composition of the increase in the expenditure, what we also see on the third panel is that most of the increase in spending has been driven by non-wage current expenditure, so mostly transfers to local governments, transfers to government institutions, but also to some extent by interest payment in the context of the authorities pivoting to domestic financing, which is more expensive in order to meet the financing needs. Now, on the other hand, there has been an increase in government revenues, as we mentioned, and it's mostly due to good tax performance, which is supported by economic dynamism as well. Now, if you just look at what this does for public debt, so we have seen an increase in public debt, which is consistent with the higher level of the fiscal deficit. And the assessment remains that the debt is sustainable, but that there is limited capacity to absorb shocks. Then, and so in this section, we've we'll be presenting more the forecasts that have been prepared as part of the macro poverty outlook, which is going to be published in 10 days' time, since the previous forecasts were for March of last year. And so what you see in our, maybe in broad strokes in our forecast is that we expect growth to remain dynamic and cross-sectoral. What you see in FY27, this increase in the growth rate is driven by the alleged beginning of oil production, and this is also reflected in industry sector growth. We expect that given the monetary stance, the inflation expectations remain well anchored, and that inflation will remain below central bank target. And together with the advent of oil revenues, would be an increase in export, which would improve the current account balance. Similarly, so on the fiscal side, so this has been this increase in the deficit. We foresee relatively stable deficit for next year, but marked improvement in the year after, assuming that oil revenues come in and that public spending growth slows down to a certain extent, which would mean that public debt as of FY27 would start coming down. Now, there are, of course, risks surrounding those forecasts. One of the main ones, perhaps to mention, is the timing of oil production. It would have the largest impact on the projections. If oil production pipeline completion were to be delayed by a year, 2 years, it would mean that this improvement that we foresee now for FY27 could be delayed as well. And now, maybe just to finish up on this section, so the report discusses a few of the structural challenges for Uganda, and many of them have been alluded to by the DST as well. So one of the main challenges is the pace of structural transformation. And so we know that even though Uganda boasts high growth rates, population growth is also higher than in peers, which means that GDP per capita is not growing at that much of a higher rate. There is a small private sector. It's mostly small informal firms, and agriculture still represents a very large amount of employment. Would it be for subsistence agriculture, which is not considered labor, but also for jobs, which are still 40% in the agricultural sector. And one of the key challenges, and hence the emphasis maybe in some of our analysis on reallocation of spending towards human capital, is that the human capital index, which tells you the impact of low health or low education on productive capacity is quite low in Uganda, and so that is one of the main challenges that we see as needed to be addressed in the coming years and the growth strategy. Coupled with the structural factors, exposure to shocks remain quite high. So we've seen that, for instance, coffee exports are a big part of the explanation why there is an improvement in the trade balance. Of course, that means also a vulnerability to swings in those prices amidst very high reliance on imports as well. And then perhaps as a bridge towards the second section of the report, which is more of the highlight of this edition, is that we are seeing that there's an increasingly constrained, there are increasing constraints on the ability of fiscal policy to actually support the attainment of these long-term goals and address these challenges. That is driven first, and this was discussed as well, by limited efficiency of spending, low public spending on health, education, and social protection. Then there is the issue, which will be discussed at length, of limited domestic mobilization, with the domestic mobilization revenue strategy aiming for a very large increase in revenue so that Uganda can finance its priorities in a context of decreasing external aid. What this means taken together is that there is less and less fiscal space in order to address those priorities, and that the composition of spending is edging more towards interest payments, and 84% of these interest payments are domestic interest payments, and less so towards the needed spending in infrastructure sectors or for human capital. With this, I will leave it to you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hopefully I can be as brief as Sarah has been, but we're discussing tax, and tax tends to be controversial in a way. It's an election time, no one wants to touch anything tax. And we all know that nobody wants to pay taxes until they're made to pay. We really know this. If you can keep your money, you want to keep it. But somehow, somewhere, oh wow, thank you for making me DSG, I like this. Yeah, but somehow, somewhere, someone has to raise revenue to be able to support the government, to be able to finance, provide basic goods and services. How we choose to do it is really up to what we propose, up to what the government takes, and up to what really makes the country a better place, and what helps the country raise really revenue in a more sustainable manner. Even if oil revenues were to come on board, I think the more sustainable way we can really finance our budget, or the government's budget, is really by looking at the non-oil economy, because that is something that is going to stay with us for a long time. The natural resources will get done, they get depleted. And the numbers might look good momentarily because you plug in non-tax revenues and they look like they're going up, but that is kind of temporary. Slides, please. My name is Silva Namnane. Happy to be here and happy to see you all. So hopefully we have some good debate today. Looking forward to this. All right, maybe I should just go ahead without them if they're not ready. Okay, So there's going to be a couple of things that we tend to look at today. The revenue trends are always going to be there. People like to look at them. They like to do regional comparison. So it's only fair that we give you some of that. Then kind of get back into some policy options that we've had a response to. But we just kind of want to give you what the numbers look like and what we really think will help raise more revenue. Whether these get implemented now or a couple of years later, as long as the work has been done, it's always good that they get implemented. Now, really, why we're really discussing this topic is that because historically, tax GDP ratio has kind of remained quite very low for Uganda, and really the revenue hasn't quite grown significantly over the years. And governments need to be mobilizing this revenue to be able to finance public needs, at least from your own resources. Donor money is shrinking, and it's a better way to finance your budget when you can raise your own money, and it's going to be more in a sustainable manner. People tend to compare what Uganda does relative to peers. It's still relatively low. It's important to pay attention to what we usually put out there. Is it the tax to GDP ratio or revenue to GDP ratios? Those numbers can be quite confusing, and sometimes people could think, okay, you're kind of putting out a lower number. But pay attention to what really happens when oil revenues start coming through. What happens to the revenue GDP ratio? It is literally going to be quite high. The tax part will probably be very low, and keep a close eye on it. And what really goes on, because that's where the real money is. The oil revenues will kind of water down over the years. Now, it's not that the tax system is not quite designed comprehensively. Uganda's tax system is kind of designed to tax all income. It's designed to tax all of consumption. If you earn a wage, you pay taxes. You own some property here and there, you're going to pay taxes on it. So each and everything income, or even if you own a business, there's going to be a tax on it. Consumption, there'll be a tax on it. VAT is there. Excise tax is also equally there. So the design in itself is quite broad. The bigger challenge really here is that the revenue yield has remained low for over a couple of years. Some people could have, append that to informality and all these things, but there are other issues that can really be done. Some are on the policy side and some are on the compliance end. Where we choose to put the weight really doesn't matter. If there are options that can be done on the policy side, do them. If there's something that you can improve on the admin side, go ahead and do it. Now, if you look back into government's own domestic revenue mobilization strategy, they had some targets. Tax GDP ratio was meant to go up to about 16, or between 16 and 18% by FY24. Obviously, of course, that didn't happen. You all know the numbers now. By that time, the outturn was probably about 13.5. So, well, they did do a couple of things in there, but still, there's room to do a little bit more. Now, DHT has kind of highlighted on some of the things they did, but doesn't hurt for me to again say there's been some improvements. A few areas you can kind of point out: enhanced productivity of the corporate income tax. It is still low though, but they did something on it, including changing the depreciation schedule, repealing initial allowances. There are improvements on VAT around streamlining the exemption schedule. So that was partly done. Of course, the technological solutions are always very welcome. The evaluation of DTS was done. Some tools researchers are evaluating IFRIs. They help improve compliance. Like I said, nobody really wants to pay. If there are solutions that help URA access more data, they're always going to be good for raising revenue. There's going to be an outcry, but I think people need to embrace some of these technologies. Now, notice that some of ththese technological innovations have been focused on the consumption side of revenue. That's why we see pretty much improvements in VAT, excise, and all these things. The improvements are quite very small on the income side. So really, income taxes basically tend to account for maybe about 34% of total revenues. And consumption is basically like consumption taxes are accounting for mostly about half. Of course, most people view them as kind of being quite regressive. But in a way, these taxes basically help you raise revenue in a way. If the people are vulnerable, you need to build in mechanisms that basically provide social protection to the most vulnerable people. Now, maybe the good news or maybe the bad news, depending on which side of the table you sit. If you're on the side of government, you're saying, okay, fine, we're thinking about these things, we're going to do them. If you're the taxpayer, yes, the government is thinking about these things, and they're hoping to streamline some exemptions. At least some of that content comes from their own documents. And they're also looking at improved fairness and transparency of the tax system, which we think are quite good things, and they will help them raise some more money. And also, of course, build capacity on both tax policy and tax admin. Now, but what we really think is apparent, and things that can really be done at, around this time, or maybe after the election is done, There can be some improvements that can be done on the personal income tax return to avoid bracket creep. We'll kind of get to really what that is or what that really means before we argue that we are pushing the burden to most people. But we need to think about it, and then we need to think about what exactly we're doing, and we need to think about the wage structure of people in this country, whether they're indexed to inflation or not, or people's wages are going up significantly or not, or what really that means in terms of the well-being of people in general. Of course, if you go around town, there's going to be a couple of high skyscrapers. Like, man, guys have money. You're wondering where that money is coming from. Can they fairly contribute to the tax system? We think that is a good thing, and if you're a high net worth individual, we hope that you voluntarily contribute, and maybe some incentives can put in place to voluntarily push you to contribute. Now, the other part, of course, we do a reassessment. We can argue about whether these tax holidays meet the intended objectives or not. We do provide some evidence that suggests that maybe they do, maybe they don't. And I think that is something that we need to look at and then kind of make a decision on whether you choose to keep these incentives or not. Because from a fiscal side, you shouldn't be giving them. But coming out right now and say don't give them usually doesn't gain much traction. We kind of need, because the governments will argue that you provide these with an objective in mind. The least we could do is help you assess and see whether those incentives are met. Those objectives are met. Then you probably have a chance to review. And then also there are things that come out of stakeholders. They usually have concerns. Listen to them. Pay attention to what they're saying because they're on the ground. Of course, they're taxpayers and nobody wants to pay, but some of those things can be quite factual and they help. Now, before we get into the PIT group things, there are a couple of things that really shrink the PIT base. If you exclude very specific groups, even if you could say this is above you and specific groups really want to be excluded, it is not good for fairness and equity. And especially if these individuals that are excluded from tax are viewed as prominent members of society and are viewed as relatively wealthy members of society. Now, they could argue that their take-home will go down quite significantly. I think finance and colleagues have a way of dealing with that. They could probably gross that up and increase the budget allocations and be able to keep the net pay of those guys the same, but kind of get rid of some of these things that make the tax system look bad. Could be an artificial gain in revenue, about 0.3 percentage points of GDP that could rise with all these things. It removes the sentiment that the tax system is designed to be unfair. If you have some of these exclusions basically in the budget, I mean in the law itself. Okay. But this was working well. Yeah, I was pointing, it was working well. Now, okay, right, there we go. Now, beyond some of these exclusions, there are a couple of things we need to really pay attention to. If 10 years ago, if you kind of rented a one-bedroom apartment in this country, small apartment, I'm not talking about the fancy neighborhoods, I'm talking about people who live in, say, for example, Chireka, small suburbs. These are guys who come out of school and are trying to live, have a life. You get a job, you're excited, PwC comes off as a job, they give you 1 million shillings, you're happy, right? Your rent is probably 250,000 then for one bedroom, or maybe it's now 300,000. 10 years down the road, that house is not still 250, even if it is still not good housing actually. It will probably be about 400 and 450. PwC is happy, not to mean that PwC pays 1 million, sorry to use PwC. But you're happy to work for your boss, you go to work every day. Maybe after 5 years, they have increased your salary by 100K. That house that you're living in is probably gone up by way more than that. So effectively, you are relatively poorer because inflation has kind of eaten into your wage, and most wages in this country are not indexed for inflation. So people over time become relatively poor, and sometimes you could go ahead and adjust the tax brackets to provide relief to the lowest earning individuals. What that doesn't essentially mean is that if you provide relief the way the personal income tax structure is kind of structured, somebody has to pay. And the burden ends up being shifted to the relatively higher income individuals. Depending on what you call higher income, but you can kind of look at what the proposal we're putting forward and what those numbers really mean for people who are kind of in that group. Now there's an exemption threshold, which is basically at about 230,000 a month, or 2.8 million. So the proposal is to kind of move that exemption threshold a little bit up. That's the beginning part. Why you're doing this is you're providing relief, at least to low-income households, those that basically earn relatively little. However, someone has to make up for whatever adjustments you're making. The proposal we put forward just kind of provides relief of at least another extra 100K for these guys who earn really at the very end. Now, there are no changes to the middle brackets. We're keeping them almost the same, but however, proposing an additional band of 35% for somewhere between 5 and 120 million. That's where I think the kicker is coming in, because everybody else who works in public service is going to say, I am going to be hit. But look, when we're providing relief to the poorest people, somebody has to pay, and it has to be one of us. But the question is how much, I think. That's where we should probably take the discussion. How much are we thinking here? It's basically modest increases. If you're basically someone who ends up to 1 million shillings, you're basically paying an extra 15,000 shillings a month. Now, if you're the guy who's getting about 10 or 9 point something million, you're going to pay an additional 450. So the burden keeps increasing as you earn the income, which is kind of consistent with saying the tax system has to be more progressive, and we're providing relief to the lowest households. Now, look, this could help you raise some money, but if the government is not interested in raising revenue, we gave them 2 other options. One that is revenue neutral, and just kind of helps provide relief for the lowest individuals. So they could ideally pick from some of those options. You're having an updated PIT structure, and then you're ensuring that the tax system is quite fair and equitable, and then really you're providing relief to low-income earners. Now, these are strategies that target our individuals that we call high net worth individuals. There could be data that is available within the URA systems that can be used, provide linkages between imports, luxury imports, and all these things, and shareholdings of companies and asset purchases and all these things. You should be able to link them and really come up with an assessment. I'm glad Robert said they called them. Next time, don't just call the guy. Go with an assessment which is clear, a genuine assessment, not an assessment that is fictitious. Sometimes those assessments happen. You come with a genuine assessment to the guy and then kind of say, look, this is what, and if the guy has imported a car and he has the SUVs parked in his compound, there's no way he's going to deny. Use that information, use it for good, and let them be able to at least contribute to the tax system. You can also, make it mandatory to disclose some of these asset ownerships. Build a central database that has all this wealth that people ideally have, and let them contribute to the tax system. Now, if you can successfully do this, then we can get into the discussion of how can we ideally reduce the top rates, because they're pretty much perceived to be very high, because everybody's chipping in, everybody's contributing, so we can have the luxury to say we can lower some of the perceived very, very high rates here and there. And maybe just one thing I want to touch on is just that these amnesty programs that they have. We're not saying tell them not to pay tax. They voluntarily come, but the penalties will be reduced, and you will probably pay all your liability, and there are no penal taxes, but you pay whatever was due. You voluntarily come, and some of this stuff will help bring out some of these relatively wealthy people. Now, some concerns come up. So, for example, we have a tax holiday for new investments, but these are not greenfield investments, and this really hurts people already existing and producing exactly the same things. And then you're granting an incentive and saying you make an additional investment, you're getting a 10-year tax holiday or something like this. If you're already existing and you're producing the same goods, that really hurts. For purposes of competitiveness and purposes of fairness, some of these things have to be addressed in some way. There are also other things like facilities that are meant to promote exports, like manufacture under bond. You bring in everything tax-free manufacture, but you're supposed to be exporting. Let's keep those facilities for exports. If you allow even 10% or 20% of that product to access the local market, you're hurting other people who are not using those facilities. Issues of competitiveness, and these come out quite strongly from the private sector. Strong collaboration between central and local government. These have been said, but let's operationalize it, such that the same tax base that is in there is not being overly focused on by 2 different arms of government. It would help if there is a streamlined way to kind of levy those rates, especially for landlords. You will suffer quite a lot. Of course, taxpayer education, I'm sure URA is working on it, and maybe a few other things that kind of we need to highlight. And this is specifically for URA. It might be helpful for businesses if you minimize the issue audits that you do. Do a comprehensive audit, because this really requires resources for the business and increases the cost of compliance. So if you can minimize the issue audits that are being done and do more comprehensive audits, that will really be be very helpful. The alternative dispute resolution mechanism was meant to be a good tool, and maybe it can be improved in such a way that it is better if the assessors are not the ones who are meant to be collecting that revenue. It just kind of presents a very big conflict of interest. And again, one thing that could be useful is to provide clear practice notices following changes in law. That helps people kind of know what they're supposed to be doing and know how they're meant to be doing to comply, as opposed to kind of making an assessment on a larger farm, it accepts, and then you bring the same assessment to a smaller farm and saying you're small, the big guys are great. So it kind of just helps make the system better and acceptable. Tax refunds are quite important. Make sure you provide them in a timely manner, because they kind of constrain businesses. If you don't, cash flow gets quite constrained. Now, the elephant in the room, I might say, is this 10-year tax holiday that everybody is saying, okay, it's good for businesses, we need to be doing this thing. The better question is that why was this incentive granted? And what has been going on over at least the last 6 years that we have data on, or at least the data is available to be able to make an assessment. Now, the initial proposal, the way it was crafted, it was meant to be a 10-year tax holiday for new investment. And if you look into it, I think, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I think someone had a tax holiday, and then at the end of the year, they paid the tax liability. They turned profitable in the last year. So the tax holiday was 10 years, they turned profitable last year, so effectively they're having a tax holiday for 1 year. And then he said, look, you want to give me a tax holiday for 10 years, I benefited for 1 year, so can we extend this? You want to avoid things like this. You want to be able to have in a place where you have if you're going to have these incentives, nicely anchor them, clearly state the objectives. The objectives for granting the investment, I literally assume to be promoting investment. Even if it's meant to be encouraging job creation, the number of jobs is not clearly stated in the provisions. Some of the places where this has been done, and we've seen some success over relatively shorter periods of time, they say you have to create at least 100 jobs or 1,000 jobs in the first 3 years. The assessment is out. I think the public finance review for Cabo Verde is available. Anyone who wants can access it. They have sunset clauses embedded in them. Now, this was meant to encourage investment, and the investment was initially meant to be 35 million if you're a foreign company, and then reduced to 5 if you're local, but these numbers are being reduced quite downwards. So the beneficiaries were basically getting additional benefits that basically went and included a VAT, excise, and all these things. If you're literally building a factory or something like that. Now, the first time we did this study was 3 years after the incentive was put in place. There were about 35 beneficiaries, or 31. Now, yeah, there were about 31 or 35 beneficiaries. This number has gone up quite significantly to 112, and these are not entirely new farms. These are partly existing farms. Majority of them are in manufacturing. 58% of them are in manufacturing, and are relatively large farms. They're not very small farms. And just to highlight that this 10-year tax holiday is not, they say it's a 10-year tax holiday, but it's not. It's a perpetual 10-year tax holiday. After 10 years, if I make an additional investment again, I would say I qualify. So it could be in the law for life. I mean, that is something that ideally needs to be looked at. Yeah, this is kind of expanding the scope of who gets to benefit. It's almost very broad, and the rules are quite very loose, if you want. This is just part of the estimation process, but we kind of do what they call a difference in difference. The most important thing that I wanted to show you are pretty much probably it is. We kind of see that benefiting farms experience increases in the wage bill, depreciation allowances. We don't kind of observe any significant effects in the initial years. We don't see quite a lot happening on fixed assets, and largely this incentive was meant to encourage investment. So this asset base of these companies is not quite significantly growing. The point estimates seem to suggest about the same. The key part, really, what we need to think about, forget about selection issues or estimation issues, that look at what is going on with the rest of the economy. The blue line is what the rest of the economy is going through. It's kind of it's really kind of struggled to kind of get their wages back to pre-pandemic wages. We could see numbers going up, but the revenue foregone from some of these things, I think government's own estimates put at 100 billion. If you look at on average how many jobs that these businesses have a year, it's about 300 jobs. You can think about it and see whether that is worth kind of the 100 billion that the government really is losing in the process. But think about it. We'll kind of give you these options to be able to think about them. The point estimates are quite consistent with what we see. We see businesses claiming very high depreciation allowances, suggesting that they're not entirely building new factories, but they could be replacing assembly parts. So they get to claim a higher depreciation allowance, and that's where we see very significant effects come up on the depreciation part. Now, the key maybe a few things to just kind of take away from this is that really exempting the largest firms raises equity concerns and undermines tax revenues. CIT in this country is only about 1.1%. Of course, last year, if you all look at the proposals, there was a proposal that is now providing relief, a 3-year tax relief for new businesses. Now you're shifting this burden to a few compliant firms. It's a problem, and we think that fuels informality. We can argue that informality is very high, but sometimes it is a design issue that kind of pushes business into informality. What really my taxman has to do, who is usually the collector, they enforce on the compliant group. And that's why everybody kind of comes and complains, okay, URA is very harsh on us. They're the enforcers. But it could be an issue that could help broaden and keep the tax base right out there. So, okay, some of this stuff I've already kind of gone over it. So what I would really like to say is that there could be a potential revenue gain if some of these things are thought of quite carefully. If you keep granting holidays, forget CIT. You're kind of purging your base, so forget about it if you keep granting tax holidays. If you really want to do something that is well targeted for investment, think about the constraints that you put in the law to be able to address some of those things. Now, we are only putting on the table options for the government to consider, especially on the policy side. We'll be back with options on the tax admin side, which is largely meant to account for 75% over the medium term. But what we put out are options and are on the table. The government could choose to take them, combine them with gains in administrative efficiency, and you'll be able to push the tax revenue quite up in a way that is more fair, in a way that is more equitable, and in a way that really supports competitiveness and supports growth. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So I'm not sure anymore who is the DST. Everyone is beginning to sound the same. So, quick admin issues. So if, like me, your brake linings are worn out and you sort of struggle to hold things in, you walk out of the door, take a left, and go to the right. That's how bad things are. You take a right, and at the end of the corridor, you follow your nose. Everything will be very clear. Yeah, it's that bad. No, I'm joking. I just wanted to see how many people were following what I have to say. The other simple admin rule is there will be no coffee break. So if you feel like a coffee, just quietly walk out. There's lots of it outside in the foyer. You will know that we've been working hard growing coffee for you, so please enjoy some good coffee. Please don't drink instant coffee. There's no excuse in Uganda to drink instant coffee. Leave that to the American soldiers who are at the front line. Drink good coffee. That's a rule. Number 3, to my panel that are coming to speak next, I forgot to say this earlier on. Please avoid acronyms because some of us don't know what PIT is, CIT is. Soon we'll be talking about Pepsi and we'll be wondering what that is, and you'll be turned out like a new tax or something like that. Can we have all the phrases in full so that people who are trying to understand what's happening know exactly what you're talking about? Kind reminder, please, all the gratitude has already been expressed. Thankfully for Cyril and Silva, we've caught up on time. So now, the team that's coming to the front, I would like to remind you, I have never ever been part of a democracy. I don't know how to run a political party. So I'm completely autocratic. The best I have done is run a company and I make the decisions. The conversation will end in 45 minutes and then we start the debate. And I mean it. So let me start by inviting Ms. Pamela Natamba, who is the tax leader at PwC Uganda, and we have a prophecy that one day she will be a tax leader, period. So welcome, Pamela. Please give a hand clap, because she might go away. Ms. Allen Nasanga, who is the Acting Commissioner Strategy and Risk Management at URA. Allen, please welcome. This one you clap loudly, because she might decide that all of you, by act of sitting here, are high net worth individuals. And it's a very painful exercise, having to sit through audits. And then allow me to invite Ms. Jane Nalunga, who is the Executive Director of Siatini Trade Policy Advocacy. And Bernard, I'd like to say to you that today I'm very happy because the panel is predominantly women. So then I don't have to do a lot of explaining out there what I'm doing with what they nowadays call a mano. And Dr. Arthur Serwanga, who is a professor of taxation at Buckeye University. Arthur, please welcome. And I left the best for last. Mr. Moses Kagwa, who is the Director of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Planning, Finance Planning and Economic Development. And from the way the DST spoke, I think he delegated him to be the DST here today. So Moses, I have a pending payment. Can I come? Right, and then of course I'll ask Silva, who is the tax economist at the World Bank, to join the panel. He's the one who made the presentation. So if you have any questions for him, he is the person to ask about the report. And just so you know, later on tomorrow in the evening, we will then take this conversation from here to the ordinary people who exist online. So we will have another conversation there that will go into, especially, I look forward to discussions about income tax. So this is how we're going to follow. So I'll start with you, Pamela. First of all, compliance. I mean, you advise a lot of clients on these issues of compliance, and then we've also been treated to public quarrels about the fairness of some of these policies, and then the incentives and how do people know about them. So can you just sort of set the stage for us? And I'll give you, for now, 5 to 7 minutes, and to talk to us, what's the environment like with all of these taxes, and how can people sort of navigate? Because for many people, actually, from what I understand, for many people, people just don't know. And I have never understood why URA and the Institute of Chartered Public Accountants of Uganda, is it chartered or certified, can't work together and just produce one audit. I pay auditors, then URA comes and does their own audit, then there's no agreement. How can we all exist in the same country and interpret the same law differently? So I'll hand it over to you, especially on the compliance issues and how the policy can, I mean, you heard what Silva said about some of the suggestions on the policy side. What do you see?
Thank you. Thank you, Robert, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll start by, first of all, speaking from a practitioner's perspective. I do a lot of tax advice and work with a broad range of taxpayers. Some are large taxpayers, international organizations, and some are local taxpayers. So I'll start by broadly commenting on the tax policy and the environment, and aligning with a number of presenters that spoke earlier. I do agree we have a very well-established legal tax framework. We do have initiatives that we have seen around domestic revenue mobilization that are very, very positive in terms of ensuring that the tax law is continuously being reviewed, checking how progressive and inclusive it is. So a number of initiatives that have been spoken about in terms of personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, seeking to widen the tax base by looking even at the smaller entities, presumptive tax that speaks to trying to simplify how people pay their taxes, introduction of flat rates, for example, for smaller businesses. So there's been a lot of positivity in that space. In addition, aspects of digitalization and automation, which have been very, very important. I think it was Silva who spoke earlier around the issues of ensuring that URA engages with the users. For example, if you think about IFRIS and the fact that it was introduced, there were challenges, there were engagements that were held with the tax authority and they were able to come through and try to streamline it to some extent. Yes, there are still some challenges, but they did make an effort to streamline the tax process, the tax policy process with the Ministry of Finance. They have created a platform where there is consultation and engagement. But again, I'll speak to that a bit in terms of some of the practical challenges that we see and perhaps what could be done. And as well as URA's commitment to transparency, commitment to integrity, we see increased engagement around training, which is very, very positive. So my first point is really to commend the positive steps that are happening. Having said that, I believe that we do have a number of challenges that we need to think through. One of them is around the stakeholder engagement. We appreciate that we are invited and the taxpayers and the private sector are invited. But I think the question is the timing. At what point do we start to engage with each other? A lot of that time, the process of engagement starts round about when the bills are about to come through. But I also know that there are times where different associations, for example, Uganda Bankers Association will be engaged, the Uganda Manufacturers Association will be engaged, PSFU will be engaged. But I think the question is, could we possibly make these more regular, more structured, start this process way earlier? If we think about the developments that are happening in some of these sectors, the changes that are consistently coming through, the private sector does quite a bit of research. Can we then utilize this research in advance and not sort of have engagements towards the tail end of some of the processes? But also, most importantly, when these engagements happen, how is this feedback taken? How is it utilized? How is it monitored in terms of when the laws are introduced, the practicality of it, looking at some of the practical experiences that the private sector have had in implementing these laws that are introduced. So being able to consistently review and look at the practical challenges vis-a-vis what the intent was of the introduction of the law, I believe is also critical. But I'm happy that Mr. Kagwa is here, so I'm sure he'll speak to some of these things. And purely, I'm speaking from experience and some of the complaints, like you said, that we get from the sector. We still do have a number of uncertainties in our laws. I spoke about, for example, the banking sector. The insurance sector is one of those areas where we still believe there's need to have clarity in the taxation of that space. Rental tax, I know we have mentioned the fact that there's been some changes in aligning that space, but we continuously see complaints from the people who are implementing. Why? Because you find that while the intention was right, sometimes the way the laws are drafted create ambiguity. So for example, for rental tax, you'll find people cannot take deductions for some of the expenditure they have incurred, genuinely incurred, to generate that rental income. So the ability, again, to engage, but not just engage, expedite the implementation of some of the recommendations that come through would be helpful.
Can you just quickly speak to the cost of arbitrating those unclear disputes? Because there's also a cost related, going to either the tribunal or hiring people.
Correct. And it is a cost, you're very right, because if you're not able to agree with the tax authority, you go through the process of objecting and you're not successful, you end up in the tax appeals tribunal, you have to pay 30% of the tax that is in dispute. But even so, we find that there's retrospective application of some of these issues, and yet perhaps it's just coming out of ambiguity in the law. But as a taxpayer, you're then looking at paying taxes not just 3 years back, 5 years back. URA has a lot of power and they can speak to it. Sometimes they go back 10 years. So you're being told to pay taxes as far back as 10 years, but there is a restriction within the law, which sometimes is not followed for whatever reason. So it becomes really costly.
Yeah.
There's an alternative dispute resolution process, but again, as Silva mentioned earlier, from our own experience, practical standpoint, you find that it's not working as swiftly as it should in terms of resolving issues, and in some cases, not as independent as we would want it to be. Not to say it's all doom and gloom. I mentioned earlier that there are very many positives, but I think also fixing some of these gaps is very critical.
Okay, so let me go to the man who teaches tax. And for you, it is basically two things that I would like you to talk to, and you can comment on others, but basically for me, it's two things. The first one is, how can we use the knowledge that is generated by these updates and infuse it in the regular conversations and discussions about what actually is happening with our taxation system, and how we can then, and how can this inform, especially you who is in academia, how can this inform a better debate than some of the riotous conversations we are treated to when people have disagreed, then we go to Kololo, then we shout at each other. And so how can we improve that? But also you as an academic, how can we build a lasting and more long-term conversation around this kind of report with, say, the World Bank? They've put this to us. How do we now get this and have a long-running conversation around these issues? Because these are important matters, and you as academics should be leading the conversation.
Thank you, Robert. You have boxed me in one corner, academic.
Oh, you can jump out if you want, but they said you are a professor, so I have no choice.
I will say this. Some of the things I will say are not academic.
Sure.
Because I'm an entrepreneur like you.
Okay.
I pay tax, and I suffer the same consequences like any other
Okay.
taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
I would start by saying that there is very little connect between academia in this country and the practice.
Right.
Very little. And the little which is there is not yet productive. So we need, the first time I got in touch with this report is when I was invited. But I'm a professor of taxation. I'm the first one in Makerere University. The first one. But I didn't know about this. So we need, World Bank, I thank you for inviting me, but we need to really grow a symbiotic relationship between these ivory towers of ours and the involvement partners, but also the ministry. We have a lot of knowledge on our shelves.
Yes.
A lot of knowledge on our shelves. And this knowledge is not anywhere in our tax policy, not anywhere in the discussions we're going to have this morning.
Right.
Which is a challenge in this economy. I'll give you, when I was reading the report, I asked myself, and this is not to castigate World Bank, but all what we are doing in this field of taxation, who in this country understands the behavioral aspects of a taxpayer?
I am here.
But you're not a researcher, you are not a policymaker, you are not a development partner.
True.
But what I'm saying is that there is very little knowledge. And even the report, very little was touched, if any. What are those behavioral aspects of a taxpayer?
Yeah.
And we can categorize in Chikubo downtown, in the Ivory Towers, in Kololo. How do they behave? So that you can avoid meeting the president at Kololo airstrip, and one time the taxpayers and the president. Very little. There are sociological issues in this economy, the cultural aspects. We have a well-designed tax regime, which is mainly British. The way Africans and Ugandans used to pay taxes is nowhere in that regime. And everybody in this country used to pay taxes before the British came. But those were thrown away, and we have gotten others which we say they are world maybe compatible, but they don't speak to our culture. So how would you have had since morning people saying that the large economy is informal? And the assumption was, let's formalize them so that you can tax them. As a businessman who chose to be informal as a strategic option. You know, most of us tend to think that being informal is an accident,
No.
which befell us. For a businessman out there, it's a strategic what? Option. And becoming formal has costs. So why should I incur those costs in formalizing so that you can tax me? So we should have policies which are aware of that. I'll give you an example. We have microfinance institutions in this economy. They have been able to work successfully with the informal sector.
Yeah.
And they give them money. But for us who want to collect money from the informal sector, we're saying, okay, let's wait for you until when you formalize, then we shall collect the money from you as taxes. We need to rethink the way we see the world. Very few of our businesses in this economy as it runs now will formalize. Recently, they introduced a 3-year tax holiday for SMEs below 500 million. I don't think it will have a lot of effect.
Why?
Because those guys out there are clever than the people who set the policy. They know that after 3 years, you're coming for the neck. So I rather stay where I am, unless there's other things which can attract me, but most likely it will not be the 3-year holiday, while the other guy gets a 10-year holiday.
Okay, so Arthur, I want to stay with you on that one. Can you
Please.
also talk to the cost of being formal? Because you have to hire an auditor, you have to hire an accountant, the process of filing returns. You have to file a return to URA, then file a return to URSB, then go and look for your marriage certificate. Then you, it's like a whole.
I was not going into numbers,
Yeah.
but I'll go into perceptions,
Yes.
which are out there.
Yeah.
The cost of transiting from informal to formal for the businessman downtown
Yeah.
is higher than the benefits he's going to take home. And any entrepreneur will know, where should I invest my resources? Should I expand my kiosk, or should I bring my papers to RSB? And if it doesn't make sense, you'll not do it. So we need to work harder. And also we need to, the government of Uganda, Minister of Finance, we need to understand, when does a business become a formal business? There is no criteria in this economy. You go to KCC, they'll ask you a host of things. You go to the URA, will ask you a host of things. NSSF will do. But what should be the bare minimum to recognize me as a formal person? So if you have that gold standard of formalization, you have started on the journey of attracting some people who would wish to cross. But you go to different government entities, they'll do different processes, you'll have different registration numbers. NSSF is a government entity, you have a number, URA gives you a number, KCC gives you a number.
NIRA gives you a number.
All those guys, URSB has given you a number. But when are you formal?
Ask coffee farmers again to get a number.
For what?
To export. Right. But let's continue.
So there are those issues,
Right.
which are behavioral, which are cultural, from the mind of a taxpayer, and you can't run away from them, which we must understand and infuse in our tax policy.
Right. So I want to turn to Jane. I mean, Arthur has completely blown up our conversation by introducing aspects that we had never thought about. So for instance, you are in trade, for instance. A lot of our people who are involved in trade are what they call informal. But I sometimes wonder, are you informal when you are dealing with a government like the government of China or the government of Dubai or the government of Thailand or wherever it is that people trade? Can you actually be informal? What is it about the nature and the history and the practice of this business of trade and commerce that we can't crack? I mean, and how can we understand it better from Arthur's point of view to expand the ability to tax? What needs to be done?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. Although I also go to, when I get time, to another.
I've stolen 2 minutes from Arthur, so you can have his 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so when you look at the issues of trade and the whole issue around informality when it comes to trade, because trade is one of those things which you can't say they are informal, you know, or because there are ways how tax and tax collectors can be able to go to people who are in business, whether they are informal, whether they are formal. And I think it's being done when you look at the presumptive taxes. Although, again, when we talk about presumptive taxes, it's important also to have a say. The people have to have a say in how that tax is collected. You know, you find there are people, for example, who have kiosks, who have saloons, you know, the way they are taxed. They don't know why they are taxed the way they are taxed. And I think it goes back to the issue which Pamela has raised, the issue of involving the people in tax processes. The time given today is very, very small, very short time for people to have a say. And if you don't have a say, there is that lack of ownership of whatever comes out. So the issue of ensuring that the people participate, instead of doing post-mortem afterwards, that we don't want that tax, we don't understand that, I think it's important to put issues in the public domain, ensure there are platforms where people can be able to say something. And I think that was also the challenge when it came to IFRIS. Everybody thought it was a tax. Yet if there was prior discussion about it, it wouldn't have come out that way.
But Jane, you on this panel are the only person I can put this to, maybe even Arthur, but I put this to you. Part of the problem with stakeholder engagement and management is that the place where these kinds of conversations are supposed to happen just doesn't allow or even understand this. That's Parliament of Uganda. That's where the people of Uganda's views are supposed to be represented. But I will never forget this. On one of the debates, there was a member of Parliament who stood up and said, we must increase the tax on diapers because of certain sexual behaviors. How do we improve the quality, if it can happen, of the debate? Why are people laughing at me? I'm advancing a serious point, so I think, okay.
Yeah, it is a serious point, but I think it will be really difficult to discuss here the quality of our legislators.
Okay, but at least the quality of the debate that we should have.
The quality of the debate,
yeah.
I think we also depend on the platforms, the spaces which are provided. Because I think people know, because we are taxpayers, I know what kind of tax which I want, which I don't want. So if the spaces are provided, you know, whether in Parliament, whether in spaces like this, the Ministry of Finance, URA, can also organize meetings, invite people, do it at local government level. They are level-headed people who can be able to put very good proposals on table. Because what I also learned from what Silva was saying, if you say you want to reduce this tax, where else are you providing, you know, relief? You know, you're providing relief here. What's the other alternative? And what I know is that there are people there who can be able to give proposals, who can be able to send proposals on table. Certainly we have been organizing, for example, we have a Tax Justice Alliance where we bring different people, you know, and we debate and we do give every year, we give alternative proposals, you know, collected from different kinds of people who are in, for example, people who are in climate change will be able to say, let us put a tax on these items in order to address environmental issues. So let us create as many spaces as possible for citizens to engage.
So I guess you, Arthur, and we'll talk to Silva here, how to take this report, have a much bigger debate.
Thank you, Robert. This morning, I spent some time and looked at manifestos which were used by the leading parties for the period we are ending. And I'll tell you this. The word tax-based taxation in the big parties appeared about 20 times. The word employment appeared about 30 times. The word entertainment in those manifestos appeared 80 times. You can do it. Just use ChatGPT, DeepSeek. it will tell you. The manifestos, the new ones, I don't have access, but the manifestos we are running to the end. That shows that as a country, we are not talking about this thing we are certain it will happen. You know, it's about death and taxes.
Yeah.
And one death every Sunday they tell you, Friday when you go to church. But taxes, nobody is talking about them. We can talk about all good things we shall do in this economy.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the resources, then you should not be able to carry out those things. So it should be multi-pronged. From ABC, when the kid goes to nursery, we should be talking about taxes. If you look at the courses we teach, most of them, you have only one course on the program to talk about taxes. And what you teach you is not very relevant to survive as a taxpayer in the field. So the education system should be talking about taxes. Culture, our culture, if you go back to your cultures, none of your cultural attributes is alluding to taxes. I'm a Uganda man, but if you go to Bulange, there's very little about taxes. We should embed those things in our cultures, in our churches, in the mosques. We should be talking about those things. That's when we shall get legislators who understand what we are talking about.
Okay, so let me turn to Alice. You've had the different views. The big one for me is, after today, how can we best take the document and the presentation that Silva and Cyril have made here today and turn it into a conversation that then leads to some of the actions that they are recommending? Because otherwise we'll walk out of here today, we talk for a few days, and then we go to manifestos, and then that's it. So how can URA create a partnership that delivers this conversation to better audiences and have a more long-term effect from, because they've done the thinking for us, they've brought the information in one report. Really, what is left for us is to discuss. Can that be complicated? Please.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from the Commissioner General who couldn't make it today. Yeah.
You also return our greetings. We like him very much. Yeah.
Okay. Within URA, we created a new department, the department I lead. It has a division for tax education. And what tax education does is we profile the different stakeholders. We reach out, we develop content on taxation. This content is simplified in a way that a lay person, a businesswoman downtown can understand. This content is also translated into different languages. We also carry out outreach engagements where we engage the public. We go to where they are. We sometimes call them in a hall, or we walk to their different businesses and tell them about taxation, about why it's important to pay taxes, what taxes are applicable to them, etc. We've also we are working with educational institutions. We've developed a curriculum for secondary school to talk about, to embed taxation. Then we are working also with institutions, the BITVET institutions, and we've developed a curricula for taxation. We are at beginning stages of engaging the universities to also have in there a curricula which all the business courses should have, talking about taxation, the tax laws, how taxation should be, because we realize that sometimes the taxation information being educated out there is for other countries. It's not really localized. Now, going back to the question of how can this be taken further, the first thing is to get the report and discuss it within URA, then break it down into smaller, probably recommendations, and we engage further on how can this be operationalized, how can we take it further. And yes, we have a role of informing on tax policy. Based on that, we can also pick out recommendations which can inform tax policy, which we can pass on to our leaders in the Ministry of Finance. And yes, we can get many of these improved. At URA, of course, we are desirous of making sure we hit the targets, the collection targets, which are continuously increasing.
That one.
And so any help, any measure that can help us ensure that we hit our targets is highly welcome.
So which makes me stay with you. And, you know, because there are issues, these ones I'll leave for Moses, because I don't want to, Moses is your boss, so out there. But the one about making it complicated for me to be a taxpayer. One, why isn't filing tax returns such a simple thing I can do on a WhatsApp and send it to you? Why does it have to be so complicated? Go to the website, enter this, then do that, then do the other. For you, it seems simple. For me, who has to do millions of other things to survive, there's just no time to do it. If I can avoid you until you catch me, the better. But I'm saying, then why is it tied to compliance with other things? NSSF, URSB, because some of those institutions, the benefit to me as a business person are not clear. So why are you tying me into NIRA, this, that? I don't know what else they ask for nowadays. But also even the timings. Why can't me to be a taxpayer be as simple as sending a text message to say, I am so and so, this is my number, this year I had no income, or I had this income, can we discuss? Because the cost for me to pay for tax compliance is a cost, then I have to pay tax, then what is left for me to eat?
Thank you so much for the question. In URA, we are desirous of making our processes very simplified. And we have a digital strategy under which we are developing platforms and ways of simplifying taxation. For example, these days we have the instant TIN, where you can apply for a TIN on your phone, or you come to any of our offices. As long as you have a national identification number, you will get the TIN. Now, the taxpayers are so diverse. We segment them. There are those who are high net worth, there are the large ones, there are the small ones, and then there are the micro, depending on the type of taxpayer you are. For smaller taxpayers, we have the presumptive regime, which is very easy. On your phone, you can, based on your turnover, you can really make your return submission and register for a payment. Now, for the slightly bigger taxpayers, the way we rely on information to know that this payment or assessment is the correct one, to know who you're dealing with, to try and grow the tax base. So for those, it's only we find it desirous to get more information from you. So we wouldn't just want to say, this is my assessment, I didn't make any, I pay this. And also, I like the way Silva put it, very few people enjoy paying taxes. So if we leave it that open,
it's
for even that big one, to just say that, this year, I didn't make any profit, here it is. In principles of trying to make taxation fair, we need some information. Okay, you didn't make any profits. What was your input? What was your output? To get some details, and then so that we ascertain, so that it's fair, and so that everyone pays their correct due amount. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll go to Moses, and Moses, you'll have the last word. But the specific question for me, I take from Silva's presentation, which is, why do we have certain individuals or certain categories exempt from paying tax in this country? Political leaders who earn the most from the taxpayers, because they earn the most money. So why are they exempt? Why is a church leader exempt, or a religious leader exempt from paying tax? Soldiers I can understand. Yes, because they sleep out in the cold. Teachers, but also specifically the question he raised about inflation and how that affects wages, and therefore, so how can we correct some of those what are perceived as unfairnesses in the tax structure? And also you can
since you've given me very specific questions, I'll give you a very specific answer.
Yes.
Why are MPs exempted from tax? Because they decided, since they have the powers, to exempt themselves.
Finished now. The debate has ended. So
the judges, why are the judges exempt is because prior to 1995 Constitution, they had an exemption. Okay? Mm-hmm. When they had this exemption, in 1997, with the coming into effect of the Income Tax Act, that exemption ceased. But the judges
went to court.
No, they didn't go to court. They interpreted, because they are the court.
Yes.
They interpreted that the Constitution of 1995 preserved their privileges, that there will be no privilege of a judge that is going to be removed to their detriment. So they said removing their exemption would actually be tantamount to removing the exemption. So that one, the exemption is by their interpretation. And if you want to challenge their interpretation, you go to court.
Okay, we'll stay here. So I think we'll stay
now
here.
On the, yes, because I said the specific, I'm answering specific.
Yeah.
On the threshold, that's what I was talking about.
Yes.
The non-taxable income, which now stands at 235,000 a month.
Yeah.
And he says, why don't we increase it? Because it was last changed in 2023. It used to be 130,000 a month. This is discussions we are having in the ministry for purposes of next financial year. I hope we'll have a solution. But I also want to respond to consultations.
Yes, exactly. That, yeah.
Because we need to design a way of making sure that people know we are consulting. On 17th September this year, we had a press conference where we told people we are open for consultations. We have written what we call tax policy making process, and we have shared it on our website. You can look at it and see how the process is going. But even before the 17th of September, we had written to associations, all associations that we could get, telling them to provide their input into the budget process. So the consultation is there, but I think we need to figure out how more we can bring this out so that everybody knows. Because if Pamela doesn't know that this process is on, I'm wondering how the man in Chikubo or somebody else is going to get to know. I was also very happy about Professor Serwanga. I think he has very good ideas. And I didn't know that there was a professor of taxation in Makerere, but we've been dealing a lot with EPRC, the business school, MOBS, and all these other people. We've been in close contact. So I'll be very happy to have further discussions, because he has some good ideas. We need these ideas which are disruptive to see how we can move the taxation agenda forward. Thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes hearing from you guys, assuming that you have something to say to us. But if you don't, then we'll have an early lunch, and we're quite happy to have. Yeah, but so are there any people who want to either ask or make comments about this report? You introduce yourself, where you're from, so that we know you're not an imposter. Then we'll know you're linked to. You're probably invited. There's a gentleman here. So then you make your intervention. We'll take 3 to 5 and then come back to the panel. Yep. No, he's on the other side there, right? So, okay.
Sebastian Walker, IMF, and congratulations to World Bank on such a good report. This is such an important topic. Congratulations to the distinguished panel for the discussion. This is such an important topic because domestic revenue mobilization is about national sovereignty, and it's also about fairness. I hope you got that, Martin. Now, in a sense, this was a bit boring because I agree with almost everything that has been said so far. But these things need repeating. But let me pick up on one aspect that might need some qualification, which is about consumption taxes being regressive. This is kind of for Silva. If that's a valid argument in a lot of places, but is that really the case in a country such as Uganda, where the informal sector is largely out of the tax system? Thank you so much.
Right. So I guess while we wait for other sorry, please go on, Barbara.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you to my team, since I'm part of the team. But I wanted to hear, my name's Barbara Magezi Ndamira. I'm the governance side of this report. I wanted to hear from Professor his take on the issues around the social contract. He was very elaborate on the culture and everything, but let's hear from him a few issues around the social contract as it relates to the DRM and whether indeed it's being considered. Thank you.
Right, so there's a gentleman right there, and then at the back, and then here, then we'll come back to the team.
So thank you very much. I'm Ezekiel Okuyu from Uganda Chamber of Energy and Minerals. So my question goes to the World Bank, I think to Silva. So I would like to know how the World Bank would like to broaden Uganda's revenue base from the extractive sector without discouraging investment. Thank you.
Good. The back there. Oh no, since you have the mic, go ahead. Then we'll come to the back.
I'm George from MOBS, where my professor
George
works.
is not a name.
George Mugerwa from MOBS.
Thank you.
Good. My question is on how do we account for the taxes that have been collected so that the person down there in my village feels proud to pay a tax, part of the social contract.
Right. And while the mic goes to the back, Moses, I think the specific question which I really wanted to ask, but sort of slipped my mind, was investment in efficiency and how the tax is used for efficiency and productivity and generating wealth. I think that issue came up, that it can't just be about broadening the tax base. It's what the taxes are used for to grow the economy. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Rogers Wanambwa. My question goes to URA, and when we are paying taxes, it follows that we have to have some income that has been gotten. However, as you all know, that our payment structures normally take months. You could do work, and then it follows that you have about 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 months without pay. However, URA, as long as you have filed an e-invoice, you want to pay the money directly or immediately. How are we going to work around that so that when we actually get the money, that is when we pay the money for URA? Thank you.
And I think I'll also ask Moses to comment on that, especially since government is the biggest businessman. He's also a terrible payer. Okay, sorry. So, but first, Silva will respond to the questions directly put to him, then Arthur, then Alice, then Moses, and then I'll check if Jane and Pam want to make some comments from what has been said. Silva.
Thanks, Sebastian. I am glad that you got bored, because if you're not, you're notorious, not Sebastian itself, but the fund is notorious if they're not bored. We'll kind of have an argument all day, but I'm glad that you were bored. I mean, some of this, like consumption taxes being regressive, it's a perception, like I said. Most people perceive it to be quite regressive, but doesn't mean that we need to get rid of it. It's one of those taxes that quite raises significant revenues for the country. Now, if there's if there's a lot of consumption that basically happens below the threshold, and all these things, so most of your low-income households, or most people, even larger businesses, who choose to be informal, can literally operate under the radar, and are not going to be contributing anything at all. So, I think, don't hold me tight to my words. It's a perception. I do think that a VAT is a good tax, and should be put in place, and should be improved, should be simplified, and there shouldn't be any distortions along the value chains that allow for URA to do what they're supposed to be doing. So, perception. Facts are a little bit different. They vary depending on the country. And then we'll get into some of that discussion, the public finance review, that will still go further into the consumption tax and probably put out some numbers that hopefully will excite you. Mr. Okwi, how can we broaden tax base? I would ask that please read the report, because some proposals are in there. And then, but remember that these are mostly focused on income taxes. More proposals will largely come in on the consumption side, and the tax admin initiatives in the public finance review that will largely be discussed a little bit later. I think those were the questions that came to me. Thanks.
Just a quick one before Arthur, you come in. Bernard, do we have some kind of QR code that people can use to scan and download the report? Solo, please display it. By the time you're sitting in this room, you surely should have a smartphone. So please, there are no excuses. And it's not going to cost you anything. So please download the report so you're able to read it. Okay, Arthur.
Barbara, thank you. You asked about the social contract, which is a very important. And this is a perceived relationship between the taxpayer and the government, where you belong. And the research has gone further to talk about now a psychological contract, which is also critical. But unfortunately, in this country, it is tilted in this favor of government. If you look at what we discussed this morning, the inefficiency or efficiencies and how government uses the money, look at the road you used, the first 2 kilometers you used from your homestead. Ask yourself, when was your garbage last collected by the government of Uganda from your premises? When did you go to the government hospital, government health or medical facility, and got the best service, as better than you can get from the private sector health provider? All those aspects tilt the social contract or psychological contract not in the favor of government. So we need really to work on that, and I'm glad the report really talked about it from a bigger macro aspect.
But also, to be fair, the report actually talks about the biggest problem in Uganda, which is if you don't deal with these issues, you have 600,000 people coming into the job market, and there's no job. Sorry, so.
We are there together.
Yeah.
It's a chicken egg.
Okay.
What do we have first, and what do we have next? You know, but what we are saying is that the government should do its part, collect the revenue, the less or the more revenue collect, spend it efficiently. Let even the most illiterate taxpayer who doesn't own a smartphone appreciate that government is putting the taxes we pay to good use.
Right.
Then the willingness. You know, people talk about the Scandinavian countries. They have the highest tax rates in this on the globe, but they have also the highest compliance rates. How does it come about? Because these contracts are in favor of government. When these contracts are not in favor of government, then you'll have to just run after every taxpayer. Expanding your tax base is going to be a problem, because everybody will be more desirous to hide under the table than disclosing what he can pay for you as a fair tax amount.
Right. Alice, then I'll come to Moses.
Thank you so much. I'm tempted to add something to what Professor has said.
The temptation is allowed.
Thank you. As URA, we also get a bit of that. You approach taxpayers, and some really don't want to pay. They say, what is the money going to do? Why are you making me pay? So we get some compliance issues from that line. And what we've done, we've working with the Ministry of Finance, we sometimes publish because of you, just speaking from what were the budgetary allocations and where did the money go. And we just maybe make out a flyer and say, this school was built, this hospital because of you. And we just send it out to the taxpayers because it's an actual problem. Some people, unless they see what their money is doing, they really don't want to pay. Now, going back to the question, thank you so much for the question. What happens, yes, when you issue an e-invoice and when you file your return, the expectation is that if you have amount to pay, you should pay. But we know that there are taxpayers who supply government especially, whose payments maybe take another 3 months or 6 months to come through. What we normally do and what I would advise is that that's a client relationship issue. URA is very approachable. We are a service-oriented organization. Come to engage the URA nearest to you or your URA office and explain this scenario. What will happen is that you'll go into a payment agreement. We'll note that because you supply government, you filed, but you don't have money. You haven't yet been paid. So we'll draw up an MOU with you, asking you to pay in installments, and you'll pay when you get paid. Thank you so much.
Moses, the question of what does my money do? How can we, I know you've explained that stakeholder engagement opportunities are there, but what is it that creates suspicion from your point of view around the social contract and makes it difficult for citizens to want to be involved with the tax payment process? I mean, there are things that they just don't see. So, but also I want to add to that, that the ones who don't seem to have the tax burden also seem to be the ones enjoying the proceeds from the tax collection or from the tax burden. How do we rebalance that issue?
Thank you. Good question. And
this time it's not specific, so you're
well, you asked specific. Sorry, I didn't get the name of the gentleman who talked about getting an e-invoice and then paying.
Roger Wanambwa is on.
Yeah, there is something called cash basis taxpayer and annual accrual basis taxpayer. I think once we understand this, then we know why some people pay taxes before they receive income, because you recognize income, or income when it's payable, not when it's paid. And we also recognize expenditure when it's incurred and not when it's paid. So you can take a deduction on your VAT for a purchase that you've made, even if you have not paid it, you paid for it. Equally, you account for the income even if you have not received it. So it washes out. But also what happened in the law specifically, though it has caused a lot of taxpayers headache, is that we said if you have supplying government and they have not paid you, then you don't pay either VAT or income tax until you're paid. What has happened is that the system of people who are accrual for the rest of their business, and now they take cash basis for only government, is that you mix it up and you don't know how you can take something that is payable as income or something that is you have incurred though you have not actually paid. So taxpayers have approached us saying that yes, this is good on one side, but it has caused us a lot of complications, and we don't know now how to balance our books. So it's something that we are looking at and see how we can address it. On perception, actually, first of all, efficiency, I agree with the bank. We've had a lot of problems with the efficiency of public expenditures.
The DST said the public servants have found innovative ways.
Yeah, there's so many things why actually some of these things were not happening, apart from the innovative ways. Because yes, but what is actually happening is that a lot of times we were unprepared for projects. Projects sound very good, we take them on, but we have not we don't have money, for example, for project affected persons.
Okay.
Yes. We have not compensated them. We don't have the right of way. And then there are certain issues. Sometimes people complain when a contract has been awarded. They go and complain that it was awarded unfairly.
Yeah.
And then the process of resolving this matter used to be so long. And by the time you do that, it's finished. The project delays. World Bank, they also used to have their issues. You can imagine a project, a road project, where an employee of a contractor has impregnated a young girl. That's nothing to do with government, but that project gets suspended. So things we are not moving, but now we have worked with World Bank on some of these issues, and they have also helped us in designing the public investment, PIMS, Public Investment Management System, which we think is going to really work and resolve these things. Now we are not taking on projects until we have money for compensation. We are not taking on projects until we are prepared. There is a pre-feasibility study that has been done, feasibility study that has been done, and everything is clear so that when you start implementing a project, it is it's not going to be affected. Now on perceptions, you're right, because people sometimes look at these things and say, why? What is government doing with this money? And the biggest challenge is actually corruption, the corruption perception. And this is something that we need to fight. We need to put in place systems, at least on our side, to put in place systems so that people don't play budget games, put in place systems that people do not misuse the money or put it to unintended uses. That is at least our side in the ministry, to put in place systems, because we think when you have systems, you can at least trace where things went wrong. And then, of course, there are the anti-corruption agencies that are doing their work. We have tried to provide, we've provided them with more money so that they can actually continue doing their work. But I think if the perceptions of corruption reduce and people are seeing that there has been value for money, these are the projects that have come up, we'll have a better execution of projects. Thank you.
I just want to bring in Jane here before I come back to the group, Jane and Pamela. But first, Jane, the problem, because the report actually is very interesting, has for the first time it mentions corruption only once. Just one. It's just once. But yet, it's the big elephant in terms of domestic revenue mobilization. And I want to make a reference to the fact that we have these frequent Auditor General's reports that are pointing out the wastage, the losses that are suffered, the monies that are not put to the right use. I think the biggest problem is not so much that, as Moses says, that we can't trace. We can actually, there's a system, the system of tracing where the wastage is very robust. I think the problem is action to correct these problems and improve the phrase that both Barbara and Arthur have introduced, the social contract, the psychological contract. So do you want to speak to that the feeling of us participating in the tax regime feels like a constraint that we're feeding someone else when we could feed ourselves? How do we, those of us who are not in the formal systems of dealing with those, how can we participate in improving this social contract?
Thank you so much, and thank you also to the questions coming in and the proposals. I think what you are raising, Robert, is really important. The issue of corruption, but also the impunity, because like you are saying, every year the Auditor General's report is out there, in the newspapers, on radio. You know, we hear corruption scandals, and nothing is done. And that's where the issue of the social contract, Madam, you are raising, comes in. Because if I'm paying my taxes and it's wasted, why should I pay more taxes? So I think it's important for government to really address these issues and to seem to be addressing the issues around corruption. But I also wanted to talk about the link between the taxes and the services, the social services. It has been raised. Because the moment you talk about revenue, more revenue, broaden the tax base, bring more people in the tax bracket, you know, it's like an extractivist system. You are extracting from the people, but what are you giving in return? And the professor has said it, if I get out of my house and the road is so bad, the first thing which comes to my mind, why should I be paying my taxes? But there is also the issue of the regressive taxes. I don't think regression is a perception. Either tax is regressive or progressive. So if we are paying a uniform tax, you and me and Robert, who is a high net worth individual.
One, not just high net worth.
One
High
of the high net worth
HNW,
individual.
one.
Why? That's a regressive tax, in my opinion. Because if it's progressive, everybody should pay their fair share of taxes. And that's why it's really important to have direct taxes. Because a direct tax, you pay according to how much you are earning. In fact, at one time, there are people we are talking with, and we are saying maybe we'll bring back graduated tax. Because one, graduated tax, yes, I see Silver wincing, graduated tax, because it's difficult to collect. But when you look at the benefits, even educating people, raising the consciousness that I'm a taxpayer, you know, that I'm a Ugandan, and I can demand for accountability. Because the challenge today is also people don't demand. People are pathetic, people withdraw from government to say, I'm not paying. Would rather have citizens who pay their taxes, but aggressively demand for accountability. Lastly, I just want to say the biggest challenge we have is how to have a happy taxpayer. And for me, I think, Madam, that you have to fight to say, how do we make a happy taxpayer? We do work with Ireland, and maybe we need to discuss that. They have happy taxpayers, and they have ways how they have ensured that taxpayers even run and fill in to pay their taxes.
Of course, the issue, and I want to put this to Pamela, one of the issues that makes us unhappy is that through no fault of your own or whatever problems you have, you find yourself being penalized for it's not that you've refused to pay taxes. It's maybe you've delayed to file the return. So the question of penalty regimes as a disincentive to me being a taxpayer, do you want to speak to that? And why is it that this whole penalty regime seems rather, it's an English word I love, it's called rapacious. You guys can chat GPT what rapacious means, it's fine. So, but talk us through the question of penalties, systems, and how people can be in a better position to avoid those things, or what we could do better from a policy standpoint.
Thank you. I know we cannot avoid a penalty regime because Otherwise, would find ourselves in situations where people who relegate or avoid their responsibility can walk away with it without having to face the repercussions.
Yeah.
So we do need a penalty regime, and we need to ensure it is fair, it is not excessive, it is just sufficient to deal with the right behaviors. It goes back to the behaviors that we see. What I believe can be done or should continue to be done, one, it goes back to the engagements that we have with the different taxpayers. Some of these taxpayers, like we said, either they do not appreciate what is within the law, or they've missed the education for whatever reason, or it is complicated, just like you were saying earlier, they are struggling genuinely to meet their obligations. So the continuous engagement to help them comply. I think as the tax administrators, as the URA, it is to think about taxpayers as partners in this business. We want revenues from them, but let's work with them to ensure that they help us achieve that. And that is why I like when we have waivers and amnesty periods, because we are saying, let's come to the table, let's help you comply, let's waive these penalties for this period of time so that you're able to be compliant. But again, sometimes not all the URA teams behave the same way. You will find the level of understanding with the large taxpayers is probably not the same if you start to go to the small taxpayers and medium taxpayers. So if there can be a consistency across the URA in terms of their understanding of these incentives, how they are administered. I mean, we're having a nightmare with implementing some of these waivers. You go down the grassroots and you find the ledgers that URA holds for different taxpayers, how they are coming up with the records that are in there. If you're a small taxpayer who does not appreciate some of these things, that waiver is not going to be helpful to you. So rather than URA, keep quiet and know that there's this incentive, but I'm not going to work with, more like I want to catch you so that you pay the penalties. I think that mentality needs to shift.
They have targets.
So it's balancing that equation. The other comment I wanted to make is around the consumption taxes, and maybe I should broaden it to be indirect taxes. We need the indirect taxes. They contribute about 50% of what we have as tax revenue. But we do need to continuously review some of these indirect taxes. And I know VAT on imported services, for example, has been one of those issues that we've debated for a very long time. Why am I paying VAT on importing a service if indeed I cannot genuinely find that service in Uganda? How do you expect me to deliver or to find expertise where I am going to end up paying an extra 18% to get someone from outside of Uganda who is going to actually help me propel my business going forward? So consumption taxes, indirect taxes, very relevant, but at the end of the day, can we look at how to not punish businesses where some of those services, goods are required and cannot be avoided and need to be consumed?
Okay, I come back again. My discretion allows me to accommodate you guys. Now, the ladies first. That's why I am being, until all the ladies say no, then I can allow the men. Okay, we shall go back to graduated tax. Let's start with him, then we come here, then. By the way, Jane, you can propose the return to graduated tax because women never used to pay it. We used to suffer that tax alone. So, go on.
Yeah, my name is Joseph Okello Ayo, and I work with the Uganda Revenue Authority.
Have you consulted with your boss? Is what you're going to say?
I'm speaking for myself.
No, please proceed.
All right, thank you. I just want to respond to Professor Arthur Serwanga on the issue of behavioral aspects of the taxpayer. I think we've, as Uganda Revenue Authority, we've done actually a number of studies that feed into taxpayer behavior. Just going back to this exact paper that is being launched by the World Bank on PIT, that's the personal income tax. We started this discussion actually in 2017, talking about changing the threshold. So we did a study in 2017 that was actually published in 2024 in the Tax Journal. And it's all about taxpayer behavior, how taxpayers respond to progressivity and all that.
Is it for public consumption?
Yeah, it is. It's online. And just to read to you a couple of papers, other papers that were done, that taxpayer responsivity to greater progressivity. We have one on analysis of distribution, of impact of excise duty. It's also on taxpayer behavior. Did Uganda's corporate tax incentives benefit Uganda's economy? It is also on taxpayer behavior. Distortionary impacts of tax audits. It's also on taxpayer behavior. Drivers and implications of import tax evasion in Uganda. It's taxpayer behavior. So we've done quite a number of papers. They're all online. Okay. Please visit them. Maybe a recommendation that was given by Silva on tax audits.
Yeah.
From the study that we just did recently, I think we need to be very careful on how you recommend that audits are supposed to be done on taxpayer. We actually found out that audits can be very dangerous. Intensive audits can be very dangerous. We saw businesses closing up because of intensive audits. And it should be taken with a pinch of salt. We are still working with we are still working on ensuring that we have recommendations that don't say, that support audits, but in a very workable and supportive way. So thank you.
I think both of you are agreed on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yes.
Yeah, my name is Mukungu. I'm a consultant with the UNDP. Thank you for the presentations. Just a quick one. From a technical policy point, they just informed us that indirect taxes constitute about 50% now. I would like just for some education, if we have indirect taxes at 50%, we want to understand in the context of informality now, with 50% of indirect taxes, what's the level of informality and how do we address the issue of double taxation?
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Geoffrey Piller. I work for UN Women, but before joining them, I was involved in the private sector, and hence my question.
Okay.
Mr. Silva mentioned in one of his remarks that timely processing of refunds to taxpayer remains something crucial, and my question to representative from Uganda Revenue Authority is, we have seen scenarios where I remit my money to you and it reaches a point where I am trying to claim for a refund. I have furnished with all the supporting documentations. We have reviewed them together with you. You have stamped them and certified them, but still it takes you ages of months to remit such refunds back to me. Yet if I'd received that refund in a timely manner, it could have supported my business to meet certain obligations in one way or the other. And what is specifically being done to address or to enhance the quick and speedy recovery of such refunds? That is one. Secondly, we have seen large companies being granted tax holidays and reliefs, yet in the actual sense, they could have contributed significantly towards the revenue collection. Some have gone as far as changing their names after completing let's say the first 10 years, all of this, they change into something else, another name, and then they reapply for such tax holidays, and still they are given. My question is, what informs granting of tax holidays to such large companies at the expense of these small and medium enterprises. Thank you.
Okay, and before the panel comes in to answer, I repeat, the QR code is there. Please read the report. Don't depend on what Silver said, because his English can also be a bit complicated. So let's, please read. Sorry, okay. Moses, I suggest you, but at the end you will respond to the question on the one that tax incentives. Arthur, you want to respond to Okello, and then Alice, you will talk about his first question. There was also the 50% indirect tax. I don't know if that should be Silver and, oh, okay, I'll leave it to you guys. All right. Alice, you go first.
Thank you so much. My name is Allen, actually, not
Allen,
Alice.
sorry. Oh,
Okay, talking about the timely
I
processing.
haven't had enough coffee, so that's...
Timely processing of refunds. When you apply for a refund, as you can imagine, now we are giving you back money. So we need to cross-check and make sure that it's a valid refund. That's the first thing. So where there are any documentation that we may need, so we request you to bring it in. Once we complete that, then the refund is approved for payment. Now it goes on the payment side. On the payment side, URA also has a budget. Now, depending on the time, it could be we are better off paying it next month. And, but we do our best to refund as much as possible amounts due to the taxpayers. Thank you so much.
Right. Okay, Arthur.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Okello. I know about that journal. I've seen it and I've published with the journal. But we need to take the level of understanding of a taxpayer in this country to a very high degree. The issues of personality, those can be taken care of. But also we're not yet there. If I asked in this room, women versus male, who are more tax compliant, we don't know. Those who go to church and the mosque versus those who don't go, who are most compliant, we don't know. They seem very simple, but they're very important.
Those of us who don't go, because our danger is higher.
Now, but they are,
the others are covered in the blood
scientific behavioral aspects like personal initiative, self-efficacy of taxpayers, we don't know. But in medicine, if you go to Mulago Hospital, they know. So if we know, and these things helped in the cure of HIV in this country, or the reduction of prevalence, we should know them for tax purposes as well. And we can compare notes, and we can be able to set up a friendly tax regime which can make a taxpayer happy.
Right. Moses, so before you come in, allow me to just ask you to specifically address yourself to the challenge of reducing ODA, because that's one of the reasons that you know, the arguments being pushed for DRM. I'm now deliberately using the acronyms to confuse you guys and confuse my enemies. But I have I have a very quick one that I want to put to Pam. One of the, I'm just explaining the challenge that some of us have and why tax compliance is a problem. As a farmer, we find that some of the standards that you people apply for accounting purposes are really complicated. Biological assets, I don't know what is this. And if you understand the nature of the farming sector in Uganda, there are things it will be almost impossible to record. Why? If I present you, Alan, my document for paying people who pick coffee, you will not accept it because of the nature in which it is recorded. But that's just the way we operate. So I don't know if there can be recognition for some of the behaviors that he's talking about as acceptable standards for accounting. If I write down somebody has one name, he came as a laborer from Chigezi, has one name, and I put a figure, why are you questioning me as if I am a thief? So please, how do I, and we employ the most people, so 40% this informality that people are talking about, can it be recognized for what it is and its practices accepted as accounting practices? Rather than holding me to, what is it called? IFRS something, which doesn't know how I pay a border guy. Yeah. Sure.
Yes, the accounting question is a difficult one. I think it speaks to, you know, you have bodies that come up with all these standards and they assume everybody is going to be able to comply.
Yeah.
So those are international accounting standards. We may not have much influence in terms of changing those, but what we have, or what I believe we have as a nation, it speaks to what Professor Arthur was speaking about earlier, is in coming up with systems of taxation, since we're on a topic of taxation, how do we meet the likes of the coffee farmers in their space? The law, the tax law will say, you know, submit your financial statements as part of your tax returns.
Yeah.
So how can we ensure that they are simplified for people that are informal, as we call them?
And that the coffee season matches with the financial year.
Exactly. So whereas we won't change the international accounting standards, for us as locals who understand the people that we work with, who understand the taxpayers, who understand the practical challenges and the uniqueness of the different sectors. And while I was thinking about, while Silva was presenting earlier, I was thinking about an increase in segmentation. It can be a disadvantage, it can be an advantage, but our tax policy, our tax laws should increasingly look at each of these subsectors and think about their unique challenges, their unique practicalities, and how we can develop regulations and laws that help them to comply. So we need to increasingly look into the uniqueness of the different subsectors.
Moses.
Thank you. I think I can set my own question and then answer it.
I asked you specifically.
The first one, the professor was asking us about informality, whether we do have a definition of formal. Because with that definition, our economy is 54% informal. And what is this definition? That somebody is registered with the Uganda Registration Services Bureau, and as a business, okay, and also registered with URA. And not only that, but that you actually complying with the law, with the registration services, that every year you go and file your returns, and if also URA, you also file. So that is the formality we talk about. And if you don't do both, then you are informal. But I also looked at the number of taxpayers we have in this country. We have about 5,353,665 taxpayers, of which 254,512 are non-individuals. So the individuals are the majority, but you will find most of them pay-as-you-earn taxpayers. But when you look at businesses, I think it also points out to the standardness of our private sector. There are just 254,512 taxpayers. When you go to Uganda Registration Services Bureau, the number of companies that are registered are 250,000. There used to be about 500,000, but during, we did some work to strike off companies that we are not complying, because under the Financial Action Task Force, they were looking for companies which had to comply. So we actually had struck off a lot of these companies. But then there are also partnerships which are registered there, amounting to 200,000. So when you look at that number, it's 450,000, but the ones registered with URA are less, they're about 254. So there are so many companies, they're on the register, I think they're doing business, but then they're not complying. Okay. So it's something that we are also trying to look at and see how we can get to those companies that are not paying. On income tax, we've been discussing this income tax. When you look at income tax as a totality, we we collect 37% of the total revenue collections. 37% comes from income tax. That is pay as you earn and personal income tax and corporation tax. So the majority of the money is coming from indirect taxes because of the nature of our economy. And I think Mr. Mukungu was asking about how is this, what is happening? First, the informal sector somehow makes a contribution because people in the informal sector buy goods from the formal. They buy, for example, sugar, it is taxed. You can buy clothes, they are taxed. You can buy a lot of things which attract tax. So there's a contribution by those people in the informal sector, but they don't come out prominently to distinguish themselves as taxpayers. Now on this issue of why tax holidays, it's a choice that government decided to take. And from the theoretical perspective, tax holidays are bad. And I think Silva really mentioned them. But when he presented the graphs there, those graphs were supporting tax holidays. The guys who had tax holidays had more people had more employees. The guys in tax holidays were paying more. We are paying more salaries than the other guys before after COVID. So there are certain things there that when you look at them, you say, hey, I think there are some benefits of these tax holidays from what has been done. We established a tax expenditure unit in URA to try and follow up. Because if you look at a model will give you some results. But now we established a team to follow up on those companies that receive tax holidays. And we really look at them in terms of their employment, in terms of the goods that they are producing and they are selling on the market, how much they are bringing on table. Then, for us, once we've gotten this, we have that man there who is our researcher to try and also interrogate these findings further to see whether what has come up supports tax holidays or not. But we also have what we call the tax rationalization implementation plan. We are looking at these tax holidays, not just tax holidays, but the exemptions in the law and see whether they are really necessary. And if they are not necessary, we are certainly going to remove them. But we've done a lot of work on this. We've worked with the bank. When we are producing what we call tax expenditure framework, we worked with the bank. On tax rationalization, we've worked with the IMF on those areas that we can see can be removed without having a lot of outcry. I'll give an example so that people are clear. One time, we removed that VAT exemptions on agriculture, on those supplies related to agriculture. We had very good justification, and everyone applauded us. But within 1 year after, I think with less than a year, we had such a big backlash, including from our own research institutions, which said that this is going to reduce the production that we had been seeing in this economy. All the gains we have got are going to go away. So politicians pushed us to reverse that. So sometimes it's easier to come here and say, let's remove this exemption, but it's very difficult. And I must say, to remove it because there are so many interested powers, and it's difficult. So That's why we are saying we are going through this process, moving slowly and saying this is how we are rationalizing. Once we have the facts properly, we'll be able to do it. I saw a manifesto, I don't know whose it was, it's somewhere on social media. But now, one of the things that someone was saying in that manifesto, remove taxes on electricity for domestic use. Remove taxes on water for domestic use.
I think let us stay with the Uganda economic update. Let's leave the manifestos alone. And I want to thank my panel who have been great in terms of enlightening you, and also to just say to you guys that this is only the beginning of the debate. Read the report, please, people. Don't just go and talk that I was at the presentation and somebody said this. Read the report and let it be the source of your knowledge and the source of your social engagement. So thank you very much, my guys. I'll ask you to step down and invite Bill to close it for us. Thank you very much. It's nearly lunchtime, so you can clap with enough energy.
Thanks, Robert. I'll be very brief. It's a tough spot being between an audience and lunch when we're late. So I just want to make a few points. This is why we do these flagship products. I think to have this discussion, I think it's been very rich. I'm not going to summarize it, so it says closing remarks. It doesn't say summary remarks. I appreciate that. But I did want to just reiterate a few things in closing. Firstly, and my colleague from the fund, who was so bored he already left, but taxes can be quite a boring topic and hard to bring to the table, hard to bring to the table to government, hard to bring to the table to government in election time. We knew that, but they're very important messages that we felt we needed to come. And what I heard today was just reinforcement on the relevance of the issue. So it's really important on fiscal policy. You just take a step back a few years. The pandemic hits. Every country is looking for a response. Fiscal policy really comes to the fore. I think in Uganda, no different. The fiscal consolidation subsequent to that has helped. But the quality of that fiscal consolidation, I think we've had some comments in our work, and it's a challenge. But we need to think about how to go forward, and this is where we take this topic from. We were reminded of the backdrop of uncertainty. I think, Robert, you posed it to the panel at the very end. The development financing landscape is deteriorating. It's changing. It's getting more challenging. And this brings to the fore these issues. In terms of the World Bank, we have a corporate scorecard that we've done a lot of work on lately. We've consolidated it down to 22 indicators. Tax to GDP ratio is one of those. We feel as an institution this is a very important issue. We don't really have to convince any government on that, and I think the Deputy Secretary did mention it can be a blessing in disguise. I think that's a lot of the discussion, including in this region. The government's own ambition is even much higher, right? The strategy is for 18%. So I think government is even putting its own goalposts. The bank doesn't have to come in and say, this is our corporate scorecard and where we think things should be. It's very important for achievement of the development aspirations that you have that have been very clearly articulated in the tenfold growth strategy. I'm reminded of the last launch that happened in February here. I was on a panel. We were talking about early child development, an investment for early child development, and the discussion got quickly to how are you going to pay for it? So it's a priority, but how are you going to pay for it? So it's just a reminder, I think, of the importance of this topic. And then, of course, in terms of the private sector-led development, it came through in the panel quite a bit. That is the nature of the development aspirations of Uganda. It's private sector-led development. The interface with the private sector, obviously very important. And my notes just blacked out here. So I think I wanted to just bring a few points. I don't want to reiterate what the Deputy Secretary said, but he did agree. Revenue collection, this is a topic that needs to be improved on. We got some comments on some of the specific policies. And that's great, because that is what we want. We want to put it out there and get some response back. I think the discussion, as Robert just said, is just starting, or this is what we want to contribute to. The Deputy Secretary also made an important point. We have a lot in the report that's on tax policy. And tax administration is a big part of the story. And I think in terms of government's own strategy, it's 75% of where the action comes from. So I think that is an area that we need to think about, and we agree that there's a lot of gains to be there. And lastly, what he said was, and we agree very much, revenue is just one part of the puzzle, right? So in terms of what's going on the expenditure side and how do we look there for improvements on efficiency of spending, prioritizing the spending, and that I think was reinforced in the panel discussions. What I really liked out of the panel was an important reminder of what's not in the report, or an aspect that's not in the report so much, which is the engagement side. And as I look at my boss, when we have our internal reviews on products like this, he's very allergic to the word dissemination. So we don't talk about dissemination strategy, it's an engagement strategy. So I think very much that's what I got from the panel, that when you're talking about this topic, how are citizens engaged? How do they think about the social contract? And this isn't in Uganda, it's in the United States, it's in every country really. If I'm going to pay, what am I getting out of it? What are the services? What are the public goods and services that I'm receiving? So that was a great reminder, I think, that we got from the panel on that. It's also on the private sector side. Are they being engaged enough? There are public goods that the private sector wants from government, backbone services in terms of being able to relate to markets, transport, energy. These are public goods that private sector is not going to provide, or provide at the right level. So just like citizens want to know what they're getting, private sector as well. And on the behavior side, I think there were some great comments that were made. And the bank has done work in other countries on this particular issue. Previous to this coverage, I lived in Dar es Salaam. We did some work with the Tanzanians, and I think I see the rationale for it. There's already been a lot of work apparently from our colleague in the back there. So a really important part of the puzzle. At the end, I just want to mention kind of next steps for us. So this is one of our flagships that we do. We do it twice a year. We also have coming up a separate analytical report called a public finance review. And it's going to dovetail, I think, nicely to this discussion as we continue that work. It covers both the revenue and the expenditure side. And it also helps to ensure that the fiscal policy is aligned with the development goals, right? The budget is supposed to reflect public policy, and that's, I think, a thread that came through today's discussion, and we'll be looking at that. So let me close. I want to recognize the bank team, my colleagues who put this together, Liz, Cyril, Silver, who got the gold medal for us in putting this together. A hand for them. I also have a colleague, Sadia, who has led a bit of this from afar and couldn't join us, so just wanted to mention her name. Very much a big thanks to government for making the time. The Deputy Secretary's schedule is very tight, so we appreciate that he was here, and he obviously read the report, or his team read the report. So we really appreciate that. That's what we want. And then lastly, to all the participants that came in the room, we really appreciate you showing up for these discussions, and we look forward to seeing you at the next UEU launch. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Bill, for bringing this to a close, and that next UEU will likely be in the second week of December before we'll break for Christmas, and the venue will be Makerere University, hopefully, to engage with young people around skills, etc. So we hope we can mobilize enough and have a good conversation. Yeah, and Bill forgot to thank the good moderator, who hopefully will be back in December, because while a student in Makerere, he was the speaker of the Students' Union, or what we call in Uganda the Students' Guild, and he was a bit of a chaotic person, so it would be nice to have him back at the university. Yeah, food is ready because you've earned it. You're all very intelligent people. But I hope we can actually get this tax to GDP thing up. What's the problem? We know what the issues are, whether they are behavioral, whether they are policy, so what's the problem? Oh, okay, it's politics. It's a political season. Yeah. So the politicians have to do what they need to do to get the policy people doing what they need to do. So we'll have lunch across the foyer in a hall there called Kyoga. You'll get your lunch coupon from the registration desk and just continue straight on. Thank you, and see you next time. Good day.